Hello there, and welcome to The Tired Thinker, a quiet space where reflection takes its time and the mind can slow down. Tonight's exploration is not about the stars above, but the signals within us, the subtle psychological red flags that, if ignored, will slowly break you. They don't always shout, sometimes they whisper, a thought you dismiss, a pattern you excuse, a boundary you let slide, and yet, left unchecked, they shape the way you see yourself, your relationships, and the course of your life. We carry so much without noticing, but noticing is the first step to changing. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it, in your corner of the world, as you pause here with me? It's a strange kind of comfort, isn't it? A video about red flags, and yet, here we are, scattered across the world, quietly sitting together, trying to understand ourselves a little more. If this slow reflection brings you calm, or if you find it helpful in your own journey, I'd be grateful if you liked the video or subscribed. It helps this tired little channel reach others who might need a softer way to think about hard things too. Now, let's begin. When you ignore your gut feeling, you disconnect from one of the most reliable guides you have. Your gut does not speak in long arguments or complex theories. It gives you a sense, a quiet pull, or a heaviness in your chest that something is not right. Many people dismiss it because it does not always come with evidence you can show on paper. You might think, I must be overreacting, or I don't want to make a scene, but ignoring that quiet signal often keeps you in places that harm you far longer than you should stay. Imagine being in a relationship where your partner does not raise their voice or openly insult you, but something about the way they dismiss your feelings makes you uneasy. Every time you try to speak up, they find a way to twist your words or laugh it off. Your gut tells you this is not respect, but your mind rushes in with excuses. You think they are under stress, or I should be more understanding. Over time, the uneasy feeling becomes part of daily life, and you start believing it is normal. Months or years later, you realize you stayed in a toxic bond because you silenced the very signal that tried to protect you. The same thing happens at work. Picture an office where a manager praises the team during meetings, but takes credit for individual ideas when speaking to higher-ups. At first, you feel a pang in your stomach when it happens, a small voice telling you that this is not right. But you remind yourself that maybe this is just how companies work, or that you should be patient. Soon, that quiet discomfort grows into dread every time you prepare for a meeting. You doubt your own value, not because you lack talent, but because you ignored the gut feeling that pointed out a pattern of unfair treatment. Your gut is not magic. It is your brain collecting subtle signals faster than your conscious mind can process. You notice tone, body language, small inconsistencies, and gaps in behavior. The part of you that senses danger or dishonesty works quietly, pulling together fragments that do not add up. When you ignore this system, you walk blind into situations where the warning lights were already flashing. Think about how you felt the first time you walked down a street at night and noticed someone walking behind you. You could not explain why it bothered you, but your gut told you to cross the street or quicken your pace. That instinct is survival. The same principle applies in relationships, jobs, and friendships. Sometimes the reason you ignore your gut is fear of what happens if you listen. If your gut tells you that your job is draining the life out of you, you would have to face the possibility of leaving. That might mean financial risk or stepping into the unknown. If your gut tells you your friend is not trustworthy, you may have to accept the pain of losing that friendship. Denial feels safer in the short term, but it chains you to situations that slowly eat away at your energy. Listening to your gut does not always mean making a dramatic exit. It can mean slowing down, observing patterns, and taking note of your feelings without brushing them aside. Consider a simple example. You go to buy a used car. The seller tells you everything is fine, but something about the way they rush through your questions makes your stomach tighten. You could ignore it, sign the papers, and discover problems weeks later. Or you could honor that feeling and get a second opinion before committing. The gut feeling here is not mystical. It is your brain picking up the rush, the lack of eye contact, the way the answers do not match the tone. By paying attention, you save yourself money and frustration. ignoring your gut often ties back to how you were raised or the environment you grew up in. If you learned that keeping peace matters more than speaking truth, you may have trained yourself to dismiss discomfort. If your family minimized your feelings with phrases like "don't be so sensitive" or "stop overthinking," you may have learned to distrust your inner signals. Over time, this habit becomes automatic. You dismiss every gut feeling as irrational, even when it is the most accurate tool you have. Think of a workplace where harassment or bullying happens. The first time someone makes a cutting remark, your gut tightens. You think, "this crosses a line." But if the culture tells you to laugh it off or not take it personally, you silence yourself. The harassment continues because the person learned no one would object. In this case, ignoring your gut does not just harm you, it enables the behavior to grow and affect others. Listening to your gut could mean raising the issue with HR, documenting incidents, or simply stating out loud, "that comment was not okay." On a personal level, ignoring your gut erodes self-trust. Each time you tell yourself your feelings are wrong, you weaken the bond you have with your own judgment. You become dependent on outside voices to tell you what is real. You might ask friends, "am I overreacting?" when deep down you already know the answer. Over time, this habit can make you feel lost and uncertain. You no longer know whether you can rely on yourself, which makes you more likely to tolerate harmful situations. There are also cases where ignoring your gut can put you in physical danger. Many survivors of accidents or assaults recall having a gut feeling before the event. They sensed something was off but convinced themselves to stay polite, not make a fuss, or not appear paranoid. That moment of self-doubt can carry a high cost. This is not about living in fear. It is about allowing your internal warning system to inform your choices, even when it feels uncomfortable. In daily life, honoring your gut can look small but makes a large impact. You might sense that a friend is pulling away. Instead of dismissing it, you check in with them, and they admit they are struggling. You might feel tension in your body when you agree to a commitment you do not want. Instead of brushing it aside, you acknowledge that saying no protects your time and energy. You might feel that something in your routine is draining you. Instead of calling yourself lazy, you look closer and see that you need more rest or a change of pace. When you start listening, you build trust with yourself. You prove that you will not abandon your own signals for the comfort of others. The more you honor your gut, the sharper it becomes. You learn the difference between fear of growth and fear of harm. You start leaving toxic situations earlier, making choices that align with your values, and protecting your well-being without needing someone else to validate your decision. Ignoring your gut keeps you stuck because it silences your most honest ally. It keeps you walking the same circles, explaining away the discomfort, and postponing the changes you need. The sooner you listen, the sooner you step into a life where your safety, energy, and peace are not negotiable. Chronic people-pleasing looks harmless at first glance. It shows up as being agreeable, helpful, and dependable. On the surface, these traits seem positive. Many workplaces even reward them. Friends might describe you as loyal, kind, or easy to get along with. But beneath the surface, constant people-pleasing drains your identity, erodes your boundaries, and leaves you exhausted. Saying yes without pause becomes a reflex. You do not even ask yourself whether you want to agree. You commit out of habit or fear, not genuine choice. Over time, this pattern shapes your life into something that belongs more to others than to yourself. Imagine a colleague at the office who is known for never refusing requests. If someone needs coverage, they volunteer. If a deadline looms, they pick up the slack. Their calendar fills with meetings they did not want to attend, and their evenings vanish under the weight of other people's unfinished work. At first, the team thanks them and praises their dedication, but soon it becomes expected. No one pauses to ask if they are overwhelmed, because the pattern has been set. That colleague begins to lose track of their own projects. They start staying late, sacrificing sleep, and burning through their reserves of energy. Their original role fades into the background as their time and effort become the safety net for everyone else. This is not sustainable, but once you build a reputation for saying yes, breaking it feels impossible. In relationships, the cost can be even higher. Picture someone who agrees to every social plan, even when they feel drained. Their friends never hear them say, "I can't tonight." They attend every gathering, even if they are sick or exhausted. They laugh at jokes that sting and hide their true feelings to keep the peace. At first, this makes them appear easygoing and fun, but inside, resentment builds. They feel unseen, like a background character in their own life. Their friends do not notice because they never speak up. The relationship becomes one-sided. The person giving all the yeses loses not only their boundaries, but also their sense of being valued for who they are. Your identity starts to blur when people-pleasing takes over. If every yes is automatic, your life becomes a reflection of others' needs and desires. Think of it as handing out copies of your time and energy until nothing is left. When you do this for long enough, you forget what you wanted in the first place. Ask someone trapped in people-pleasing what their own goals are, and they might pause. They can tell you what others expect from them, but struggle to name their own desires. The self gets buried under years of practiced compliance. There is also the physical toll. The body does not ignore stress, even when the mind tries to push through. Chronic people-pleasing often leads to fatigue, headaches, stomach issues, or insomnia. These symptoms come from constantly overriding your own needs. Imagine forcing yourself to run on an empty tank every day. Eventually something breaks down. Yet many people in this cycle keep going because they fear the alternative, disappointing others, facing conflict, or being seen as selfish. The fear of saying no often comes from early lessons. Maybe as a child you learned that approval came only when you performed, obeyed, or helped. Perhaps you had a parent who dismissed your feelings, but praised your compliance. Saying no might have led to criticism or punishment, so you trained yourself to avoid it. As an adult, that habit sticks. Saying yes feels safer even when it harms you. It becomes a strategy for survival that no longer serves you in the present. Consider a family example. A grown child continues to manage every holiday plan, even though it leaves them stressed. They cook, host, clean, and make sure everyone else feels comfortable. Their own enjoyment disappears under the weight of logistics. If they tried to step back, they fear the family would label them ungrateful or selfish. So they continue year after year, until the thought of holidays brings dread instead of joy. The yes is automatic. The cost is heavy. There is also a professional example that shows the same dynamic. A nurse agrees to every shift extension. At first it seems admirable. They are dedicated, reliable, and trusted. But over time their body wears down. They work double shifts, lose sleep, and carry the stress home. Their family life suffers. Yet when asked to cover again, they agree. They cannot bear the idea of letting their co-workers down. Their yes comes from obligation, not choice. Burnout follows, and the very career they once loved becomes unbearable. The problem with chronic people-pleasing is not kindness. True kindness comes with choice. The problem is compulsion. If you cannot say no, then your yes has no weight. Agreeing to help because you want to and agreeing because you fear rejection are not the same. The first builds connection. The second drains it. People sense the difference even if they do not say it. A yes rooted in fear lacks authenticity. It creates silent resentment that seeps into every interaction. When you lose the ability to say no, you also lose respect. Others may not intend harm, but they will come to expect your compliance. Boundaries teach people how to treat you. Without them, you invite disregard. Think about how often someone asks for a favor. If they know you never refuse, they stop seeing it as a request and start seeing it as a guarantee. This shifts the dynamic from respect to exploitation, even if it happens unconsciously. Over time, chronic people-pleasing can make you invisible in your own life. Your needs vanish behind the chorus of other people's wants. You might achieve external harmony, but internally you live with conflict. You feel drained, frustrated, and sometimes even angry at yourself for lacking the courage to speak up. Yet the habit feels so ingrained that changing it seems impossible. You fear people will reject you if you stop pleasing them. The irony is that the more you people please, the less authentic your relationships become. Friends, partners, and colleagues are not connecting with the real you. They are connecting with the version of you that bends to keep them happy. That version hides your true thoughts and feelings. Real intimacy cannot grow in that space. Over time, relationships built on chronic people-pleasing collapse under the weight of unspoken truths. Think of a simple scenario in daily life. A friend invites you to dinner, but you are exhausted after a long week. Your gut tells you that you need rest. People-pleasing tells you to agree. You go, sit through the meal and smile, but inside you are tired and distracted. The evening that could have been restful turns into another demand. The friend leaves happy, but you go home drained. Multiply that small choice across weeks, months and years, and you see how people-pleasing strips away your ability to care for yourself. Chronic people-pleasing is not generosity, it is a cycle of self-erasure. Each yes without thought is a piece of yourself handed over without consent. You lose energy, you lose boundaries, and you lose identity. By the time you notice, you may not even recognize the person in the mirror. Your smile is there, but behind it lies exhaustion, resentment, and the quiet grief of a life spent meeting everyone's needs but your own. Constant self-criticism feels like a private discipline at first. You tell yourself that pointing out every flaw will push you to do better. You believe that if you stay harsh, you will never slip. But over time, this voice in your head stops guiding you and starts punishing you. Instead of improving performance, self-criticism chips away at your confidence, makes you doubt your skills, and drains the motivation that once fueled you. The critic becomes louder than your actual ability, and soon you measure every action against an impossible standard. Picture a student preparing for an exam. They study for weeks, review the material, and know the subject. On the day of the test, they sit down and freeze. Every answer comes with the thought, "What if I am wrong?" Even when they remember the correct formula, the self-criticism whispers that they are careless, lazy, or not as smart as others. The test is not just about knowledge anymore. It becomes a battlefield against their own mind. They leave convinced they failed, even if their score is high. The critic inside does not celebrate progress. It moves the goalposts and says, "You could have done better." That cycle repeats until studying feels less like learning and more like punishment. Workplace scenarios show the same effect. Think about an employee who finishes a big project. Their boss praises the quality and speed, but instead of feeling proud, they focus on the one small mistake they made. The typo in a report or the missed email reply becomes all they can see. They replay it in their head, telling themselves they are sloppy. Over time, they begin to hesitate before sharing ideas, fearing that any flaw will confirm their self-criticism. Colleagues may not notice, because the person still produces results, but inside they are burning out. Their confidence shrinks, and their motivation fades. They no longer aim for creativity or innovation. They only aim to avoid mistakes, which narrows their growth. Self-criticism also affects personal relationships. Imagine someone at a dinner party who tells a story and notices a few people did not laugh. On the ride home, they replay the moment and call themselves boring or awkward. They forget the smiles, the laughter, and the warmth of the evening. The critic highlights only the silence. Over time, this voice makes social settings feel like minefields. The person starts withdrawing, convinced they always say the wrong thing. Friends may think they are shy, but the truth is, they are exhausted from battling their own self-judgment. The damage of constant self-criticism lies in repetition. A single negative thought may not harm much, but repeated daily, it becomes a belief. The brain learns patterns. If you tell yourself you are lazy every time you rest, the brain begins to accept laziness as your identity. If you say you are stupid every time you forget something small, intelligence becomes something you doubt, even in areas where you excel. The critic builds a false picture of who you are, one that ignores your actual strengths. This false picture often has roots in early experiences. Children who grew up hearing frequent criticism learn to adopt that voice inside themselves. Even when the external critic disappears, the internal one remains. A teacher who said, "You will never be good at math," can echo in your head years later every time you face a challenge with numbers. A parent who dismissed your effort with, "You could have done better," plants the idea that nothing you do is enough. Adults carry those messages into every area of life, unaware that they are fighting ghosts from the past. Some people confuse self-criticism with accountability. They believe that being harsh keeps them responsible, but accountability means facing mistakes with honesty. not with self-punishment. For example, if a surgeon makes a mistake during a procedure, accountability means reviewing the error, reporting it, and making changes to prevent it again. Self-criticism, on the other hand, would sound like, "I am a terrible doctor, I should quit, I ruin everything." The first approach leads to growth and safety. The second destroys confidence and may drive a skilled professional out of a career they could still excel in. Consider an athlete who misses a crucial shot during a game. Self-criticism will focus on that single moment, repeating, "You always choke under pressure." The athlete begins to fear future opportunities, tightening up and avoiding risk. But if they approached it without self-punishment, they could analyze the mechanics of the miss, adjust their practice, and improve. The critic shuts down growth because it turns one event into a judgment of identity. It is no longer, "I missed a shot, but I am a failure." That shift poisons motivation. In daily life, self-criticism often shows up in small but constant ways. You look in the mirror and notice only flaws. You write an email and reread it 5 times, convinced it sounds unprofessional. You finish a day of work and dwell on what you did not complete instead of what you achieved. These small cuts add up. They create an ongoing sense of inadequacy that no amount of effort can quiet, because the critic always finds another angle. The irony is that people who live with strong self-criticism are often high achievers. They push themselves hard because they are afraid of falling short. From the outside, they may look disciplined and successful, but inside they feel empty, convinced their success is luck or temporary. They set new goals not out of excitement, but out of fear that stopping will expose them as frauds. This constant pressure leads to burnout, and even when they achieve, they rarely feel satisfied. There are moments when ignoring self-criticism is not just about mental health, but about safety. Consider a pilot who makes a small error during a flight. If they spiral into self-criticism mid-air, their focus shifts from correcting the situation to punishing themselves. That distraction could risk lives. In high-stakes fields like aviation, medicine, or emergency response, the ability to separate error from identity is crucial. A critic that overwhelms confidence can interfere with decision-making and create more danger than the original mistake. Even in low-stakes settings, the damage is real. A writer who tears apart every draft may never finish a book. A student who rewrites every essay sentence until it feels perfect may miss deadlines. A parent who constantly criticizes their own parenting may become so insecure that they fail to provide stability for their children. In each case, the critic stops progress rather than promoting it. The cycle of constant self-criticism creates a trap. The more you criticize, the less you trust yourself. The less you trust yourself, the more you rely on the critic to keep you in line. It becomes a closed loop that leaves little room for growth or self-respect. Confidence fades because every success gets dismissed, and motivation collapses because every effort feels doomed to fall short. The critic, once meant to guide, becomes a weight that drags you down. Beating yourself up does not make you sharper. It makes you afraid. It makes you cautious in ways that block learning and creativity. It erodes the very qualities that help you grow. Confidence is not arrogance. Motivation is not blind optimism. Both can only thrive in a space where mistakes are seen as part of learning rather than proof of failure. Constant self-criticism builds the opposite space, one where every step forward feels like walking under the shadow of your own judgment. The fear of saying no often looks like a small act of kindness. You agree to take on a task, attend a gathering, or lend a hand because you do not want to upset anyone. You convince yourself that saying yes keeps the peace. But every time you ignore your own limits, you trade short-term harmony for long-term strain. Avoiding boundaries does not make life easier. It builds resentment, drains your energy, and leads to burnout. Saying no is not rejection. It is an act of honesty that protects your time, health, and relationships. Imagine an employee in an office who cannot refuse extra work. Their manager asks them to handle another project, even though their schedule is already full. They nod and agree, even as they feel the pressure rising. At first, the manager appreciates their willingness, but soon it becomes the expectation. The employee works late nights, skips breaks, and carries the load of 2 people. They tell themselves it is only temporary, but the requests keep coming. Over time, frustration builds. They resent their boss, their team, and even themselves for never speaking up. Burnout creeps in. What began as an attempt to be helpful ends with exhaustion and bitterness. The same pattern shows up in family life. Picture a parent who agrees to every demand from relatives. They host every holiday, manage every schedule, and sacrifice their weekends to keep everyone happy. On the outside, the family praises them for being dependable. Inside, they feel used and unappreciated. They smile at gatherings but secretly dread the work that falls on them. They swallow their resentment because they fear conflict. By avoiding one uncomfortable moment of saying no, they create a constant undercurrent of anger that poisons their relationships. The fear of saying no often comes from how we were taught to value others over ourselves. Many people grew up in homes where obedience meant safety, or where defiance brought criticism. Others learned in school or church that self-sacrifice was a measure of worth. By the time they reach adulthood, saying no feels selfish or rude. The habit of compliance becomes so strong that even small refusals feel like betrayal. You may know logically that you cannot do everything, yet the idea of disappointing someone fills you with guilt. That guilt drives you to agree when your body and mind are already stretched thin. Consider a simple scenario. A friend asks you to help them move on the only day you have off that week. Your muscles ache from long hours at work, and you need rest, but instead of saying no, you agree. On moving day, you drag yourself through the tasks, irritable and exhausted. You snap at your friend, then feel guilty afterward. The day that could have been restful turns into a drain on your energy and a strain on the friendship. The refusal you feared would hurt the relationship might have actually protected it. Saying yes when you want to say no can also warp professional dynamics. Take a nurse who always covers extra shifts. At first, the hospital staff praises their dedication, but soon co-workers stop asking anyone else because they know the nurse will never refuse. What began as generosity becomes exploitation. The nurse grows resentful, but the system continues because they never draw a boundary. Their silence teaches others that their time is always available. The longer this goes on, the harder it feels to change. One no at the beginning might have set limits. Years of yes make the shift much more difficult. Resentment builds not just toward others, but toward yourself. You begin to question why you cannot speak up. You replay conversations in your head, wishing you had said no, but feeling trapped in your compliance. Each time you agree against your will, you reinforce the belief that your needs do not matter. Over time, that belief chips away at your sense of self. You become someone who exists for others' comfort, while your own comfort slips further out of reach. The fear of conflict lies at the center of this struggle. Many people think that saying no automatically creates anger or rejection, but conflict does not always mean a fight. It can mean a conversation where two people admit they have different needs. Saying no might create a moment of disappointment, but it also creates clarity. Without clarity, relationships rely on hidden resentment. With clarity, they have a chance to grow on honest ground. Think about friendships. If you never refuse, your friend assumes you are always available. When you finally reach a breaking point and explode, they feel blindsided. They did not know you were unhappy because you never said so. The blow-up damages the friendship more than an honest no would have. By avoiding small moments of discomfort, you set the stage for larger eruptions later. In the workplace, boundaries often define respect. A colleague who says yes to everything may look reliable, but others soon take advantage, even unintentionally. Contrast this with a colleague who says no when needed. Their refusals may disappoint, but they earn respect because their yes carries weight. People trust their commitment because they know it is given with intention, not fear. The ability to say no marks someone as confident and grounded, while constant yes signals insecurity. Burnout is the final stage of avoiding no. Your body and mind reach a point where they can no longer carry the load. Fatigue, irritability, and illness creep in. You start to dread the very roles and relationships that once gave you meaning. Work feels like a trap, family feels like a burden, and friendships feel like obligations. This collapse does not come from laziness. It comes from years of ignoring your own limits. By saying yes to everyone else, you said no to yourself until nothing was left to give. There is also the danger of training others to ignore your boundaries. Every time you accept what you do not want, you teach people that your no does not exist. Over time, they stop seeing your needs. Not because they are cruel, but because you never show them where your lines are. Teaching others to respect you begins with respecting yourself. If you cannot honor your limits, no one else will, even in small daily choices. The cost is clear. You agree to take a call when you are tired, and you end up resenting the conversation. You attend a meeting that could have been skipped, and your productivity suffers. You lend money you cannot spare, and you feel used. Each of these choices chips away at your energy. Alone they seem minor. Together they build a life of quiet resentment. Saying no does not mean rejecting people. It means being honest about your capacity. It means trusting that relationships built on truth can handle boundaries. It means accepting that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of respect. When you avoid no out of fear, you trade authenticity for temporary comfort. The comfort never lasts. What remains is the slow, heavy weight of resentment and the creeping shadow of burnout. Stress is part of life, but when it becomes constant and overwhelming, many people begin to treat it as normal. They convince themselves that living with anxiety, fatigue, and chaos is simply the price of being an adult. This belief keeps them stuck in cycles that harm their health, damage relationships, and limit growth. When stress becomes the default state, the body and mind never get the chance to recover. Instead of seeing warning signs, people tell themselves that everyone feels this way, that exhaustion is a badge of honor, or that calm is unrealistic. This mindset prevents healing and turns temporary strain into long-term harm. Picture someone working in a busy office. They wake up already tired, rush through traffic, and face a pile of emails before they even sip coffee. Their heart races through the day as they juggle deadlines, calls, and meetings. At night, their mind replays the unfinished tasks, keeping them awake. This routine repeats for months. Instead of stepping back, they shrug and say, "This is just how work is." They stop questioning the toll it takes. Headaches, back pain, and irritability creep in, but they ignore them because everyone around them seems just as stressed. What feels common begins to look normal. The problem is that the body does not see it as normal. Elevated stress hormones strain the heart, weaken the immune system, and disrupt sleep. By the time the damage shows up in serious ways, years may have passed. Family life can follow the same pattern. Imagine parents who spend every evening shuttling kids from one activity to another, cooking late dinners, and answering work emails after bedtime. They rarely sit down together, and when they do, fatigue makes conversation short and tense. Both parents feel stretched thin, but tell themselves that this chaos is what raising children looks like. They joke with friends about being tired, treating it as a universal truth. The truth is that not every family runs this way. The choice to pack every schedule and ignore rest is a cultural habit, not a requirement. But when you normalize it, you stop looking for healthier ways to live. Stress also becomes normalized in friendships. A person might constantly cancel plans because they are overwhelmed, but excuse it by saying, "Life is just crazy right now." Weeks turn into months of the same excuse, and soon the friendship weakens. Both people accept that stress controls their time. The one who cancels feels guilty, and the other feels unimportant, yet both shrug because stress has been accepted as the explanation for everything. The relationship suffers not from lack of care, but from the belief that chaos is unavoidable. Workplaces often reinforce this mindset. In some companies, long hours and exhaustion are worn like medals. Employees who push through fatigue are praised as dedicated, while those who set boundaries are seen as less committed. In this culture, stress is not only normalized but glorified. The cost shows up later in turnover, medical leave, and disengagement. People who once cared about their work lose motivation because their health cannot keep up. What could have been prevented by respecting limits becomes a crisis. Normalizing stress changes how you interpret your body's signals. When you feel anxiety before every meeting, you might call it nerves and move on. When you drag through the day with no energy, you might say that everyone is tired. When you lose interest in activities you once enjoyed, you might dismiss it as growing older. Each symptom gets brushed aside because stress has become the default lens. Over time, this dulls your ability to notice real danger. Burnout, depression, and chronic illness arrive, and by then it feels sudden even though the signs were there all along. Consider the example of a medical resident. The training years are famous for long hours, lack of sleep, and constant pressure. Many residents accept chest tightness, migraines, and emotional exhaustion as part of the process. They tell themselves, "This is just how medicine works." By the end of residency, some leave the field entirely, not because they lack skill but because they learn to treat harmful stress as permanent. The profession loses talented people because the culture normalizes suffering. In personal health, the same trap appears. Someone might live with daily digestive issues, headaches, or muscle pain, but dismiss them as stress-related. Instead of addressing the cause, they adapt to the discomfort. They push through work, social events, and family life while their body sends louder signals. What could have been managed early becomes a chronic condition. The turning point comes not when they choose to seek help, but when the body forces them to stop. By then, recovery is longer and harder. Even in small daily choices, normalization shows up. A person might drink coffee late into the evening to fight fatigue, scroll through their phone past midnight, and wake up restless. They call it a normal routine. They tell themselves that everyone struggles with sleep, and that being wired and tired is just modern life. Yet this cycle deepens stress and blocks recovery. Without rest, the nervous system never resets, leaving them stuck in a state of constant alert. Relationships also suffer when stress is treated as unavoidable. A partner who is always tense, distracted, or irritable creates distance without meaning to. The other partner may begin to feel neglected or blamed. Both might accept stress as the culprit and stop addressing the impact. Slowly the relationship weakens. What could have been managed through boundaries, shared responsibilities, or rest becomes a steady erosion of intimacy. Stress does not just affect individuals, it spills into every connection around them. The danger of normalizing stress lies in how it narrows your vision. Instead of asking, "How can I change this?" you ask, "How can I endure this?" Endurance becomes the goal, not healing. You focus on surviving the week, instead of building a sustainable life. The problem with this approach is that endurance runs out. No one can push indefinitely without recovery. The body forces breaks through illness, the mind through collapse, or relationships through conflict. Think about a young professional who enters a high-pressure industry. In the first year, they feel anxious, tired, and overwhelmed, but they tell themselves it is the price of success. They push harder, staying late and skipping breaks. By the 5th year, they can no longer sleep without medication. Their blood pressure is high, and their relationships are strained. They look back and realize that what they thought was normal was actually years of unaddressed stress. If they had seen the early signals as warning signs instead of daily life, the outcome could have been different. Stress will always exist in some form, but treating constant stress as the baseline hides the difference between challenge and harm. A challenge pushes you to grow. Harm drains you until there is nothing left. When you stop distinguishing between the two, you accept harm as a permanent condition. That acceptance prevents you from making the changes that protect your well-being. Healing begins with noticing that stress is not the same as life. Life includes rest, joy, and calm. When you normalize stress, you erase those parts and live in survival mode, mistaking it for reality. Seeking validation feels safe because it offers quick approval. When others praise you, you feel worthy for a moment. When they accept you, you feel secure. The problem is that this security does not last. Living for validation means shaping your choices around other people's expectations instead of your own values. It traps you in a cycle where your sense of success depends on constant approval. Over time, this habit erodes authenticity. You become skilled at reading what others want from you, but struggle to answer the question of what you actually want for yourself. Imagine a student who chooses a career path because it pleases their parents. The parents encourage medicine, law, or finance, and the student complies even though their real passion lies in art or teaching. For years, they perform well, earn praise, and meet the standards set for them. On the surface, they succeed. But inside, they feel restless, drained, and disconnected from their own life. They continue because the validation feels easier than facing the disappointment of others, yet every achievement feels hollow. The applause belongs to the version of themselves built for approval, not the authentic self that remains hidden. Workplaces often reward validation-seeking behavior. An employee who works long hours, never questions authority, and produces results that please managers may be celebrated. They may receive promotions and recognition, but beneath the recognition lies a quiet struggle. They do not voice their ideas if they risk disapproval. They do not set boundaries because they fear being seen as difficult. They measure success by the smile or frown of a supervisor, not by the quality of their own growth. Over time, they lose confidence in their independent judgment. Their career may look polished on paper, but it is shaped more by compliance than by authenticity. In relationships, the cost becomes personal. Think of a partner who constantly molds themselves to fit the other's preferences. They dress a certain way, adopt certain hobbies, and suppress their opinions to avoid conflict. The partner may feel satisfied at first because the relationship appears smooth, but the one seeking validation carries a silent weight. Their real needs remain unspoken. The relationship becomes a performance rather than a genuine bond. Resentment builds because authenticity has no place. When the mask eventually slips, both partners feel the distance created by years of unspoken truths. The search for validation often starts early. A child who receives praise only when they achieve high grades or display certain behavior learns to connect worth with approval. Over time, this message embeds itself so deeply that as adults, they cannot separate achievement from identity. They measure every action by whether it wins approval, not whether it aligns with who they are. This conditioning creates adults who fear rejection so much that they silence authenticity to maintain acceptance. Social media amplifies this cycle. Likes, shares, and comments create a measurable form of validation. A person may post something they believe will earn attention rather than something that reflects their true thoughts. The dopamine rush of approval feels rewarding, but it also teaches the brain to chase external signals. Soon the person creates content not for expression but for validation. When the numbers drop, they feel inadequate, even if the post reflected something honest. Their self-worth rides on metrics they cannot control, which creates anxiety and self-doubt. Consider an artist who starts painting because it brings them joy. At first, they experiment freely, enjoying the process. Friends begin to praise certain styles, and buyers request specific themes. The artist adapts to meet demand. Over time, they stop painting what excites them and produce only what sells. Their success grows, but their passion fades. The studio becomes a factory for validation, not a place of expression. They look successful to the world, but feel disconnected from their own work. Seeking validation can also weaken resilience. When your worth depends on approval, rejection feels unbearable. A writer who submits a manuscript and faces criticism may stop writing altogether because the feedback threatens their sense of identity. If they valued authenticity over validation, they could use feedback as a tool without tying it to their worth. But in the cycle of validation, criticism feels like proof of failure rather than an opportunity for growth. In everyday life, small choices reveal this struggle. Someone might agree with opinions they do not share to avoid standing out. They might attend events they dislike because they fear disappointing friends. They might laugh at jokes that offend them because silence would break the flow. Each of these choices seems small, but they accumulate into a pattern where authenticity rarely gets a voice. Over time, the person may not even know what their authentic preferences are because they have silenced them for so long. The emotional toll is heavy. Living for validation creates anxiety because you are always scanning for cues of approval or disapproval. It creates exhaustion because maintaining a performance requires constant energy. It creates emptiness because achievements earned for others do not fill the need for personal meaning. You may appear successful and even happy to others, but inside you feel disconnected from your own life. There are also relational costs. People connect more deeply with authenticity than with performance. A friend who always agrees may seem pleasant, but may not inspire trust. A colleague who always conforms may avoid conflict, but may not inspire respect. Authenticity creates the foundation for intimacy and trust. Validation seeking erodes it because others sense the lack of genuine presence. Even when people do not consciously notice, they feel the distance. A common scenario is the person who never says what they really want for dinner, always deferring to others. At first, it looks polite, but after years of always agreeing, they realize no one actually knows their preferences. Something as simple as a meal becomes a symbol of lost identity. When authenticity is absent in small things, it becomes harder to access in larger decisions. The trap of validation is that it feels safer in the short term, but creates deeper dissatisfaction in the long term. Approval soothes for a moment, but the cost is authenticity. When you live for approval, success belongs to someone else's definition, not your own. You may win applause, but the person standing in the spotlight may not feel like you. The emptiness that follows is not from lack of success but from lack of self. Avoiding conflict feels like the safest choice in the moment. You hold your tongue, change the subject, or agree when you do not mean it. The silence keeps the room calm, but beneath the surface the cost builds. Peacekeeping often means sacrificing your voice, and when your voice is missing, unhealthy dynamics grow stronger. Conflict itself is not the enemy. It is a natural part of human connection. What damages relationships is not the presence of disagreement, but the absence of honest expression. When you avoid conflict at all costs, you do not create peace. You create a fragile quiet that hides resentment, fuels imbalance, and allows harmful behavior to continue unchecked. Imagine a marriage where one partner dismisses the other's concerns about finances. Each time the subject comes up, the dismissive partner brushes it off, saying, "It's not a big deal, I'll handle it." The other partner feels uneasy but avoids pressing the issue to prevent a fight. Months pass, bills pile up, and debt grows. By the time the truth comes out, the damage is much larger than it would have been if conflict had been addressed early. Avoidance allowed the problem to grow in the dark. The effort to keep harmony ended up creating deeper division. The workplace shows the same dynamic. Think of a team where one member regularly dominates meetings, cuts others off, and pushes their ideas without listening. Colleagues stay quiet to avoid tension. They tell themselves it is easier to let it go. As a result, valuable ideas never surface, and the team grows frustrated. The dominating behavior strengthens because it goes unchallenged. Silence looks like agreement, so the person believes their conduct is acceptable. Over time, morale drops and talented employees disengage or leave. By avoiding conflict, the team enables dysfunction that undermines its success. Friendships are not immune either. A friend may constantly cancel plans at the last minute. Instead of addressing the frustration, you smile and say, "It's fine, I understand." Inside, you feel hurt and undervalued. Over time, resentment builds. You stop initiating plans, and the friendship slowly fades. The friend may never know why, because you never voiced your feelings. In trying to protect the friendship from conflict, you actually starve it of honesty, which is the foundation of trust. The fear of conflict often begins early. Children who grow up in households where anger led to shouting, punishment, or withdrawal learn that conflict is dangerous. Others may grow up in environments where expressing disagreement was seen as disrespect. As adults, they carry those lessons forward. Saying what they really think feels unsafe. Even when the risk is small, they prefer silence to honesty, not realizing that silence creates its own form of harm. Avoidance also sends subtle messages to others about what is acceptable. If you never speak up when a colleague makes offensive jokes, you send the signal that the jokes are tolerable. If you stay quiet when a partner ignores your needs, you teach them that your needs do not matter. If you always nod along with decisions you disagree with, you reinforce the belief that your opinion has no weight. In each case, the avoidance does not just protect the peace, it actively shapes the relationship by lowering expectations of respect. Consider a workplace example where a manager plays favorites. One employee consistently receives better assignments and recognition while others work just as hard. The team notices but says nothing. They tell themselves that raising the issue could backfire. Over time, resentment spreads. Productivity suffers because no one feels valued. The silence did not prevent conflict. It created a toxic environment where unfairness thrives. Speaking up might have been uncomfortable in the moment, but it could have led to accountability and balance. Avoiding conflict also creates an internal cost. Every unspoken frustration becomes something you carry. You replay conversations in your mind, thinking of what you wish you had said. You feel tense around people you have avoided confronting. The stress accumulates in your body, showing up as headaches, fatigue, or anxiety. What you keep inside does not disappear. It leaks out in sarcasm, passive-aggressive comments, or sudden bursts of anger. The very conflict you fear emerges in distorted ways because it has no healthy outlet. In relationships, constant avoidance creates distance. A partner who never shares dissatisfaction may look agreeable, but the lack of openness blocks intimacy. Intimacy requires honesty, including the honesty of saying, "I feel hurt" or "I disagree." Without it, the relationship may feel calm on the surface but empty underneath. Both partners go through motions while important needs remain unspoken. What looks like peace is really disconnection. Conflict, when handled directly and respectfully, serves an important role. It allows problems to surface, boundaries to be set, and misunderstandings to be cleared. Think of two co-workers who disagree on how to handle a project. If they avoid the conversation, the project stalls. If they engage, they may clash at first, but eventually find a compromise that strengthens the work. The conflict does not weaken the team, it strengthens it by forcing clarity and cooperation. The difference between destructive and constructive conflict is not whether it exists, but how it is managed. Destructive conflict involves yelling, blaming, or avoidance that fuels resentment. Constructive conflict involves stating needs, listening, and seeking solutions. Many people fear conflict because they have only seen the destructive version. They do not realize that conflict can be a tool for growth when approached with respect. Consider a family example. A teenager feels suffocated by strict rules and begins to withdraw. The parent notices but avoids addressing it to keep the household calm. The distance grows until the teenager stops sharing anything. If the parent had risked conflict by asking hard questions and hearing difficult answers, the relationship could have remained open. Avoidance shut the door, instead of keeping peace. Even in friendships, conflict handled well can deepen trust. A friend who feels hurt by a broken promise but speaks up, gives the other person a chance to apologize and repair. The conversation may be uncomfortable, but it shows that the friendship matters enough to risk honesty. The repair builds strength. By contrast, silence allows the hurt to fester until the bond quietly dissolves. The irony of avoiding conflict is that it often creates the very outcomes you fear. You fear rejection, but silence can make people drift away. You fear anger, but bottled frustration eventually erupts in harsher ways. You fear division, but unspoken problems divide more than open conversation ever could. The short-term comfort of avoidance becomes long-term damage. Avoiding conflict at all costs sacrifices your voice, and with it, your sense of agency. It creates space for unhealthy dynamics to grow unchecked. Speaking up may feel risky, but silence carries its own risks. Every relationship, whether at work, in family, or with friends, depends on the balance of honesty and respect. Without honesty, respect fades. Without respect, peace is only an illusion. The choice to avoid conflict may keep things quiet today, but tomorrow it leaves you living in dynamics where your needs, feelings, and boundaries no longer exist. Minimizing your pain often feels like strength. You tell yourself it is not that bad, that other people have it worse, or that you should be able to handle it without complaint. At first, this looks like resilience, but over time it turns into self-denial. When you brush aside pain, you send yourself the message that your feelings do not matter. This invalidation keeps you stuck. Instead of healing, you push the pain deeper, where it shapes your choices and limits your growth. What you do not face does not disappear. It waits until it shows up in other ways, through stress, anger, or disconnection. Imagine someone who goes through a breakup after years in a relationship. Friends ask how they are doing, and they say, "I'm fine, it's not a big deal." They keep busy, dive into work, and avoid thinking about it. On the outside, they look composed, even strong, but inside, the loss weighs heavily. By telling themselves it is not that bad, they block the grief that could help them heal. Months later, they find themselves mistrusting new partners, avoiding intimacy, or feeling sudden sadness they cannot explain. The pain they minimized did not vanish. It simply waited for another way to be felt. The same thing happens with physical pain. A person notices recurring headaches or chest tightness, but dismisses it as stress. They tell themselves it is nothing serious. Instead of seeking medical attention, they keep pushing forward. By minimizing the symptoms, they delay care. What could have been addressed early grows into a larger problem. The habit of saying, "It's not that bad," keeps them from protecting their health until the damage is harder to reverse. Workplace dynamics reveal another example. An employee feels overlooked when their contributions are ignored in meetings. They swallow their frustration and say to themselves, "It's fine, I shouldn't make a fuss." Over time, the repeated invalidation chips away at their confidence. They stop speaking up, believing their voice does not matter. By minimizing their pain, they reinforce a pattern that silences them. What began as one small hurt becomes an ongoing cycle of invisibility. In families, minimizing pain often passes from one generation to the next. A child falls and cries, but a parent says, "You're fine, stop crying." The child learns early that their pain is not worth acknowledgement. As they grow, they internalize the idea that expressing hurt is weakness. As adults, they dismiss their own struggles with the same words. "It's not that bad." This cycle creates people who can endure discomfort, but struggle to heal, because they never give themselves permission to feel. Trauma survivors often experience this in profound ways. Someone who lived through neglect or abuse may look back and say, "It could have been worse." Others had it harder. They minimize their suffering as a way to cope, but this denial blocks them from processing what actually happened. Healing requires recognizing the full weight of the experience. By reducing it, they prevent themselves from working through the impact. The pain remains in their body and mind, influencing relationships and choices long after the events. Even in small daily moments, the habit shows up. You might feel exhausted, but tell yourself, "I'm just being lazy." You might feel anxious, but say, "I'm overreacting." You might feel lonely, but dismiss it as unimportant. Each time you minimize your pain, you reject your own reality. The body and mind carry the weight, but you deny them acknowledgement. Over time, this disconnection makes it harder to recognize your own needs. You drift into patterns where discomfort feels normal and self-care feels indulgent. Consider someone working long hours in a demanding job. They feel constant fatigue, but instead of naming it, they tell themselves, "Everyone is tired, this is normal." They ignore their body's signals until burnout hits. By minimizing their pain, they lose the chance to make adjustments earlier. Their career suffers not because they lacked ability, but because they refuse to see their own limits. Relationships also suffer when you minimize your pain. A partner may say something hurtful, but instead of expressing it, you convince yourself it is not worth mentioning. You keep quiet to avoid conflict. Over time, the unspoken hurts pile up. Resentment grows in silence until it creates distance. What could have been resolved through honest conversation becomes a wedge that weakens the bond. Avoiding acknowledgement of pain does not protect relationships. It erodes them from the inside. Social pressure reinforces this habit. Many cultures reward stoicism, teaching that strength means not showing pain. Phrases like "tough it out" or "keep it together" encourage suppression. While endurance has its place, constant minimization creates harm. Real strength is not about denying pain, but about facing it with honesty. When society celebrates silence, people learn to carry wounds alone instead of seeking help. Another example comes from grief. Someone who loses a loved one might say, "They lived a long life, I shouldn't be so sad." They minimize their sorrow because they believe it is not justified. But grief demands expression. By refusing to feel it, they prolong it. The unacknowledged sadness may surface years later as depression or emotional numbness. The belief that pain must always be compared or justified keeps them stuck instead of moving through the natural process of healing. Minimizing pain can also show up in mental health. A person struggling with depression might dismiss their feelings as just being tired. Someone with anxiety might say they are just stressed. By softening the reality, they avoid seeking support. But untreated mental health struggles deepen over time. What could have been helped with therapy or support becomes more severe. Saying "it's not that bad" blocks the path to recovery. In friendships, this habit weakens trust. When a friend hurts you and you say, "it's fine," even though it is not, you rob them of the chance to repair the damage. They continue unaware, and you carry silent hurt. Over time, the friendship becomes one-sided. Authentic connection requires honesty about both joy and pain. Without it, relationships remain shallow and fragile. The long-term effect of minimizing pain is a life built on denial. You move through experiences without fully processing them. You present a strong face to others, but carry quiet suffering inside. You may even start to believe your own denial, forgetting what genuine well-being feels like. Healing requires truth. When you tell yourself it is not that bad, you delay that truth. You trade temporary comfort for long-term harm. Pain demands acknowledgement, because acknowledgement is the first step toward growth. Without it, you remain stuck in cycles where the same wounds repeat, disguised by the words you use to silence them. Living in constant comparison traps you in a cycle where progress never feels enough. No matter what you achieve, there is always someone who appears to have more, do more, or be more. Instead of seeing your growth for what it is, you measure it against others and come up short. This mindset turns every accomplishment into a disappointment because the focus shifts from personal milestones to external rankings. The comparison itself becomes the standard, and satisfaction slips further away the harder you chase it. Imagine a student who studies hard and earns a solid grade on an exam. For a moment, they feel relief and pride. Then they overhear a classmate who scored a few points higher. Instantly, their accomplishment feels worthless. The grade did not change, the effort did not change, but the sense of value collapses under comparison. Over time, this pattern teaches the student that success is not about learning or improvement, but about outperforming others. The joy of growth disappears. The drive to learn turns into a fear of falling behind. Workplace environments amplify this problem. Picture an employee who receives recognition for completing a big project. They feel proud until they see a colleague being promoted the next week. Instead of celebrating their own achievement, they feel envious and inadequate. Their project suddenly feels small. They forget the effort, the skill, and the progress it represented. In a culture where comparison is constant, progress does not bring motivation. It brings restlessness. No matter what you do, someone else's success overshadows it. Social media magnifies comparison in daily life. Scroll through a feed, and you see curated highlights of other people's lives, vacations, promotions, fitness milestones, happy relationships. Rarely do you see the struggle, the failures, or the ordinary moments. If you measure yourself against those images, your own life looks dull. A quiet evening at home feels empty when compared to someone else's travel post. A modest accomplishment feels insignificant next to another person's polished announcement. The comparison is not fair, but the impact is real. You end up judging your reality against someone else's highlight reel. Relationships also suffer under constant comparison. Imagine a partner who notices how attentive a friend's spouse seems on social media. They begin to measure their own partner against that image, questioning why they do not act the same way. The relationship becomes strained, not because of actual problems, but because of a comparison to an incomplete picture. The partner who is judged feels inadequate, and the one comparing feels dissatisfied. Both lose sight of the unique qualities in their own relationship. The habit of comparison often starts early. Children who grow up hearing statements like, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" or "Look at how well she did," learn to tie their value to how they measure against others. These lessons follow them into adulthood. They chase validation through being better, faster, or stronger, not through being themselves. Every time they make progress, they immediately look sideways instead of forward. The habit of measuring against others replaces the ability to measure against personal growth. Consider an athlete in training. They run faster this month than last, but instead of celebrating, they focus on the fact that a teammate still beats their time. The comparison blinds them to their improvement. Instead of feeling motivated, they feel defeated. This mindset not only kills joy but also harms performance. Confidence erodes when progress never feels good enough. Motivation drops when effort always ends in dissatisfaction. The athlete may eventually quit, not because they lack ability but because comparison drained the meaning from their progress. Even in creative work, comparison blocks growth. An artist may feel proud of a painting until they scroll through other artists' work online. Their pride turns into self-doubt. They stop creating freely and start copying trends to keep up. Their art loses authenticity because it becomes shaped by what others are doing. The cycle of comparison strips away originality and replaces it with imitation. The artist does not improve because they no longer follow their own vision. They chase validation instead of expression. Constant comparison also affects mental health. It feeds anxiety because you are always scanning for how you stack up. It fuels depression because you rarely feel enough. It fosters envy, which damages relationships, and shame, which damages self-worth. The brain begins to associate progress not with satisfaction but with inadequacy. The more you achieve, the more you compare, and the less you value yourself. It is a cycle with no natural end because there will always be someone to compare to. The irony is that the targets of comparison are rarely accurate. You do not see the full context of other people's lives. The co-worker with the promotion may struggle with stress you do not see. The friend with the perfect vacation photo may feel lonely. The athlete with the faster time may have trained under conditions you cannot match. But comparison rarely accounts for context. It reduces people to numbers, titles, or images, and then measures worth through those narrow lenses. In friendships, comparison often creates quiet competition. One friend shares good news, and instead of feeling happy, the other feels left behind. The friendship weakens because envy takes the place of support. The joy of shared connection disappears under the weight of comparison. Over time, this habit leaves people isolated. They avoid closeness because closeness feels like constant measurement. Consider a scenario in family life. A parent works long hours and provides for their children, but when they see another parent post photos of elaborate vacations, they feel inadequate. They minimize their own efforts and convince themselves they are failing. In reality, their children may value the security and love they provide more than trips or luxuries, but comparison blinds them to their impact. It distorts the truth and leaves them feeling less than even when they are doing enough. The danger of constant comparison is that it takes away ownership of your progress. Instead of asking, "Am I growing?" you ask, "Am I better than them?" Instead of asking, "Does this bring me meaning?" you ask, "Does this look impressive?" The measure shifts from internal to external, and with it, satisfaction fades. You live in a race with no finish line, where every step forward is followed by a glance sideways that steals your joy. Living in constant comparison turns progress into endless dissatisfaction because it strips growth of meaning. It replaces authenticity with competition, achievement with envy, and self-worth with doubt. The habit blinds you to your own journey and binds you to the shifting standards of others. No matter how far you go, it will never feel enough because the measure is always moving. The comparison becomes the cage, and you are the one who locks the door. Perfectionism often hides behind the mask of ambition. At first, it looks like high standards, strong discipline, and a desire to do things well. On the surface, it even earns praise. Teachers call it dedication, employers call it work ethic, and friends admire the detail and effort. But beneath the appearance of drive sits something else. Fear. Perfectionism is rarely about love of excellence. It is more often about fear of failure, rejection, and criticism. What looks like ambition is really avoidance. The perfectionist is not reaching upward with joy, but clinging tightly to control, so they cannot be seen as less than flawless. Imagine a student working on an essay. Instead of writing a draft and improving it, They rewrite every sentence over and over, never satisfied. They stay up late, polishing details most readers will never notice. Their grade ends up high, but they collapse from exhaustion. The teacher sees the product and praises the effort. The student hides the cost, the stress, the sleepless nights, and the constant anxiety that any flaw will reveal them as inadequate. The essay is not just an assignment, it becomes a test of worth. That is the burden of perfectionism. Every task carries the weight of proving you are good enough. The same pattern plays out in the workplace. An employee spends hours preparing a report, checking numbers repeatedly, adjusting formatting, and obsessing over details that do not affect the outcome. They fear a single mistake will ruin their reputation. Their work may impress at first, but deadlines slip and productivity suffers. Colleagues grow frustrated because collaboration becomes difficult when perfection slows everything down. The perfectionist believes they are protecting themselves from failure, but in reality the fear undermines their performance and relationships. In personal life, perfectionism builds silent barriers. Picture someone hosting a family dinner. They want the meal, the table, and the atmosphere to be flawless. They stress over every detail, from matching napkins to the exact timing of dishes. By the time the guests arrive, they are exhausted and irritable. Instead of enjoying the company, they focus on what went wrong. A dish that cooled too quickly, a glass that did not match, or a moment of awkward silence. The family leaves full and happy, but the host feels like a failure. The standard of perfection stole the chance to connect. Perfectionism also distorts identity. When your worth is tied to flawless outcomes, you stop seeing yourself apart from your performance. A mistake does not feel like an error in judgment. It feels like evidence that you are flawed as a person. This is why perfectionists struggle to take risks. Any venture that carries uncertainty feels unsafe. They would rather avoid trying than risk failing. Over time, this avoidance narrows opportunities, carers stall, relationships lack depth, and personal growth stalls because safety is chosen over possibility. The roots of perfectionism often lie in childhood experiences. A child praised only for achievements, or punished harshly for mistakes, learns that love and acceptance are conditional. To feel safe, they aim for perfection. Even as adults, the same lesson continues. They believe that mistakes equal rejection, and that being less than perfect means being unworthy. The fear of letting others down becomes stronger than the desire to live authentically. This conditioning is powerful because it ties survival to flawless performance. Social pressures reinforce the cycle. In cultures that celebrate hustle, productivity, and achievement, perfectionism is rewarded. People who burn out are called dedicated. Those who sacrifice rest and joy for performance are labeled committed. The cost, anxiety, health issues, broken relationships is hidden behind polished results. The perfectionist learns to keep suffering private, while showing the world only the polished surface. The applause they receive makes the cycle harder to break, even as it deepens the fear underneath. Consider an athlete training for competition. They perform well in practice but fall apart under pressure. Their fear of missing a move or losing control freezes them. They rehearse endlessly, punishing themselves for small errors, and carry the weight of proving themselves with every performance. To spectators, they may look disciplined. Inside, they live with dread. What looks like ambition on the field is actually fear driving them to exhaustion. The trap of perfectionism is that it hides failure instead of preventing it. By avoiding risks, the perfectionist misses opportunities to learn. A writer who refuses to share their draft until it is flawless may never publish. A professional who avoids speaking up until they are certain may never contribute ideas. The absence of visible mistakes looks like success, but it is really a loss of growth. Each avoided risk is a hidden failure, disguised by the image of control. Relationships suffer too. Perfectionists often demand the same standards from others, even if quietly. A partner may feel they can never do enough. A child may feel constant pressure, or a friend may feel judged. Even when the perfectionist directs the harshest criticism inward, the ripple affects everyone around them. The household feels tense because mistakes are not tolerated. Love feels conditional because approval depends on performance. What was meant to protect against rejection creates distance instead. Perfectionism also distorts time. Hours disappear into small details that do not matter. Energy drains into rehearsing conversations, editing minor errors, or replaying past choices. The perfectionist may appear busy, but progress stalls. A project that could be finished in days stretches into weeks. A simple task becomes overwhelming because the standard is never satisfied. The fear of imperfection creates paralysis. Nothing ever feels ready enough to release into the world. The mental and physical toll is heavy. Anxiety grows from constant fear of mistakes. Depression follows from never feeling good enough. The body suffers from lack of rest, chronic stress, and overwork. Health deteriorates even as the external image looks polished. The perfectionist may achieve on paper, but feel empty and worn inside. The cost of maintaining the appearance of flawlessness outweighs the benefits of achievement. Even in daily interactions, perfectionism steals peace. Someone may replay a conversation, analyzing every word they said, worrying they sounded foolish. Another may avoid inviting guests over because their home does not look perfect. Someone else may put off starting a project because they fear not doing it flawlessly. Each of these moments shows how perfectionism narrows life. Instead of engaging, trying, and connecting, the person waits until everything feels safe, and safe never comes. Perfectionism looks like ambition because it drives effort and attention to detail, but the energy behind it is fear, not joy. It hides a deep worry that failure means rejection and imperfection means unworthiness. The result is not true excellence but endless exhaustion. The perfectionist appears strong, but feels fragile because every flaw threatens their sense of identity. What they want most, acceptance, remains out of reach because they believe they must earn it through flawlessness, when in truth flawlessness was never required. Overthinking feels productive because it looks like careful planning. You tell yourself that if you think through every detail, you will avoid mistakes. You replay scenarios in your head, weigh every option, and search for the perfect choice. But instead of leading to clarity, the cycle creates paralysis. You stay stuck in thought while action slips further away. Analysis replaces movement. The time that could be spent learning through doing is lost to endless mental loops. Overthinking does not protect you from failure. It traps you in hesitation until opportunities pass and nothing changes. Imagine someone considering a career change. They are unhappy in their current job, but afraid of making the wrong move. They spend nights reading about industries, comparing salaries, and listing pros and cons. Each time they settle on one idea, new doubts surface. What if the pay is too low? What if the market shifts? What if they regret leaving? Months turn into years of research, but they never apply to new positions. The job they dislike becomes permanent, not because they lacked options, but because they never acted on them. The thought process that was meant to guide them became the cage that held them back. Relationships suffer in the same way. Picture a person after a first date. Instead of enjoying the connection, they replay every moment. Did they talk too much? Did they laugh at the wrong time? Should they text first or wait? The questions circle endlessly until they convince themselves they did something wrong. Fear of making the wrong move leads to silence, and the potential relationship ends before it begins. Overthinking did not protect them from rejection. It created rejection by blocking natural connection. Workplaces reward planning, but overthinking often looks like procrastination in disguise. An employee tasked with creating a presentation spends hours adjusting fonts, rephrasing slides, and second-guessing the structure. They delay sending it because it never feels finished. The presentation becomes a source of stress instead of a tool for communication. The cycle of revision continues until deadlines loom. The product suffers not because of lack of effort, but because of wasted energy on endless micro-decisions. Overthinking turned a manageable task into a burden. Overthinking often grows from fear of regret. The mind convinces you that, with enough thought, you can find a path with no risk, but no choice comes without risk. Waiting for certainty delays progress until opportunities vanish. Consider a person offered a chance to relocate for work. They weigh the pros and cons daily. Better pay and growth on one side, fear of leaving family on the other. They think for so long that the offer expires. They remain in the same role, unsatisfied, and now filled with regret. The irony is that in trying to avoid regret, they created it. Small decisions can become just as heavy. A person stands in the grocery store debating between two brands of cereal, replaying cost, taste, and nutrition. What should take seconds stretches into minutes. The decision is minor, but the overthinking reflects the same habit, searching for a perfect outcome where none exists. The mental energy wasted on trivial choices drains the capacity for important ones. By the end of the day, decision fatigue sets in, and even meaningful tasks feel overwhelming. The roots of overthinking often lie in early experiences with criticism or failure. Someone who grew up being punished for mistakes may carry the belief that any wrong step has severe consequences. They overthink to avoid judgment. Others may have experienced unpredictable outcomes, where even good choices led to bad results. They learn to analyze endlessly, trying to control the uncontrollable. The habit forms as protection but becomes a barrier in adulthood. Perfectionism feeds overthinking. When you believe every action must be flawless, you hesitate to act until you feel certain. But certainty rarely comes. You wait for the perfect moment, the perfect plan, or the perfect skill set, and in waiting you miss the chance to learn through doing. A writer may outline a novel for years, never writing the first chapter because it never feels ready. An entrepreneur may plan a business endlessly, never launching because conditions never feel perfect. The opportunity to improve through practice disappears because thought replaces action. Overthinking also affects health. A person feels a minor symptom and immediately searches online, reading every possible condition it could mean. The more they read, the more anxious they become. Instead of visiting a doctor, they cycle through worry. Anxiety intensifies, even if the symptom is minor. The cycle of thought creates more suffering than the symptom itself. What could be resolved with a checkup becomes a constant source of fear. Relationships show the emotional toll most clearly. Someone receives a short text from a friend and spends hours interpreting it. Were they upset? Did I say something wrong? Should I reply now or later? The friend may have been busy, but the overthinker creates a narrative of conflict. The friendship feels tense, not because of reality, but because of imagined scenarios. This constant doubt wears down trust and connection. Even opportunities for joy are diminished. A person on vacation may spend the trip worrying if they picked the right destination, if they are spending money wisely, or if others are having a better time. Instead of relaxing, they analyze. The trip ends, and they feel unsatisfied, not because it was bad, but because they never let themselves enjoy it. Overthinking robbed the experience of its meaning. The danger of overthinking is not just lost time, but lost confidence. Every cycle of hesitation reinforces the belief that you cannot trust yourself. Instead of building trust through action, you hand control to doubt. You become dependent on others' opinions, or on endless research, never believing your own judgment is enough. The more you overthink, the less capable you feel, and the less capable you feel, the more you overthink. It becomes a closed loop that erodes self-trust. Some people justify overthinking by calling it preparation, but preparation involves planning followed by action. Overthinking stalls at planning and never moves forward. A hiker who studies maps but never sets foot on the trail gains no experience. The only way to learn is to begin. Mistakes along the way offer lessons that thought alone cannot provide. The habit also limits creativity. Creativity thrives on risk, experimentation, and trial. Overthinking demands certainty, which kills experimentation. An artist who questions every brushstroke produces nothing. A musician who doubts every note never finishes a song. Creativity requires space for imperfection, and overthinking closes that space. In the end, overthinking keeps you in your head, while life happens outside of it. You imagine possibilities, weigh risks, and replay decisions until the moment to act passes. Thinking becomes a substitute for living. The paralysis feels safe, but the cost is growth, joy, and progress. Overthinking does not save you from mistakes. It ensures that the mistake is always the same, choosing thought over action and missing what could have been. Believing you are always the problem may look like humility, but it is closer to self-destruction. Taking responsibility for your actions is healthy, but taking responsibility for everything erases balance. When you carry the weight of every mistake, every disagreement, and every shortcoming, you begin to see yourself as the source of all trouble. That belief does not make you more accountable. It makes you more vulnerable to blame, exploitation, and exhaustion. The idea that you are always at fault turns into a lens through which you view every situation. Instead of asking what really happened, you assume guilt before the facts. Imagine a workplace where a project runs into delays. The truth is that multiple factors caused the setback: lack of resources, unclear goals, and poor communication among several teams. But one employee immediately tells themselves it must be their fault. They comb through their emails, replay conversations, and punish themselves for missing something. Even when the manager points out broader issues, the employee cannot shake the belief that they failed. Over time, this constant self-blame chips away at their confidence. They stop sharing ideas because they fear those ideas will cause problems. Their value to the team diminishes, not because they lack skill, but because they silence themselves under the weight of assumed fault. In relationships, this habit can turn damaging quickly. Picture someone in a partnership where arguments arise. Instead of seeing the conflict as shared, they immediately apologize, even when they did nothing wrong. Their partner grows used to this dynamic. Over time, the balance shifts. The one who always accepts blame becomes invisible. Their needs are ignored because the relationship revolves around avoiding their partner's displeasure. What looks like keeping peace is actually erasing their own voice. The constant self-blame allows unhealthy patterns to flourish because the other person never has to face their own responsibility. Families show another version of this trap. A child raised in an environment where parents placed blame on them for everything, whether a sibling's outburst, a parent's stress, or household problems, may grow into an adult who reflexively assumes fault. If a friend cancels plans, they think it must be because they did something wrong. If a coworker seems distant, they assume they caused it. Their first reaction is not curiosity or perspective, but guilt. This habit runs deep because it was learned early, and breaking it requires unlearning the idea that you are the center of every problem. The irony is that believing you are always the problem is not noble or generous. It does not make you more responsible. It keeps you stuck in shame and gives others permission to avoid accountability. If you always step in to absorb blame, people around you may let you. They may even take advantage of your willingness. In a workplace, colleagues may allow you to take the fall because they know you will not resist. In relationships, partners may push boundaries further because you never hold them accountable. The belief that you are always at fault does not protect others. It enables them to continue without reflection. Consider an example of a group project in school. Several students were supposed to contribute, but only one person does most of the work. When the teacher points out gaps, the person who worked hardest still apologizes and blames themselves for not doing more. The classmates escape responsibility, while the one carrying the load feels shame. The truth is that responsibility was shared, but the habit of self-blame distorted the view. The cycle repeats as long as the student continues to believe they are the cause of every failure. Self-blame also leads to distorted thinking. You begin to interpret neutral situations as evidence of your fault. A friend seems quiet, and you assume you upset them. A colleague frowns, and you decide it must be because of something you said. The reality may have nothing to do with you, but the habit of internalizing blame makes you blind to other explanations. This constant guilt feeds anxiety and erodes self-esteem. You no longer trust your judgment because you filter every interaction through the assumption that you are wrong. The physical and emotional toll is heavy. Carrying responsibility for everything creates chronic stress. The body reacts with tension, fatigue, and sometimes illness. The mind carries constant guilt, which can spiral into depression. When you never allow yourself the relief of balance, you live in a state of constant self-punishment. The belief that you are the problem becomes not just a thought, but an identity. You stop seeing your strengths and focus only on flaws. This mindset also blocks growth. When you believe everything is your fault, you avoid risk. You do not try new things because failure feels inevitable and crushing. You avoid speaking up because disagreement feels like wrongdoing. You settle for less in work and relationships because you do not believe you deserve more. Instead of moving forward, you shrink. The belief that you are always the problem limits not only your self-esteem but also your future. Even small daily situations reveal the pattern. If you spill a drink at a restaurant, you tell yourself you ruined the evening. If traffic makes you late, you apologize repeatedly as if you caused the accident. If a coworker misses a deadline, you wonder what you could have done differently, even when it was beyond your control. These small acts of over-responsibility build into a life where you never feel free. Every situation feels like a test you are failing, even when no one else sees it that way. The trap of self-blame is that it feels safe because it gives you control. If you are always the problem, then you can always fix it. Accepting that not everything is your responsibility means facing uncertainty. It means admitting that some problems are out of your control, caused by others, or simply part of life. For someone used to carrying blame, that lack of control feels unbearable, so they cling to guilt, not realizing that it is destroying their confidence. Relationships built on self-blame become unbalanced. A partner, friend, or colleague who always takes responsibility leaves no room for honesty. The other person never sees the need to reflect or change. Over time, resentment grows. The self-blaming person feels unseen and unappreciated, while the other grows accustomed to a dynamic that serves them but harms the relationship. What looked like responsibility at the start becomes dysfunction. Believing you are always the problem creates a cycle of shame, anxiety, and exhaustion. It turns responsibility into punishment and accountability into self-destruction. By taking ownership of everything, you erase the truth that responsibility is shared. Mistakes are part of growth, and not every outcome rests on your shoulders. The world is complex, and not every challenge has you at its center. But as long as you live with the belief that you are always at fault, you carry the weight of problems that do not belong to you, and you lose the chance to stand in your own life with balance and clarity. Tolerating disrespect does not always happen in one obvious moment. It often begins with small comments, subtle dismissals, or thoughtless actions. At first, you might brush it off, telling yourself it is not worth the effort to respond. You convince yourself that staying quiet keeps the peace or shows patience. But each time you allow someone to cross your boundaries without response, you teach them that it is acceptable. Over time, the small acts of disrespect grow into larger patterns, and what began as tolerating becomes enabling. Disrespect becomes the norm, not the exception, because silence looks like permission. Imagine a workplace where a manager makes jokes at an employee's expense during meetings. The first time it happens, the employee laughs awkwardly and moves on. The second time, they stay silent. Soon, the jokes become a regular feature. Co-workers begin to laugh along, not necessarily because they agree, but because the behavior has been normalized. The employee feels humiliated, but continues to tolerate it. By the time they think about speaking up, the pattern feels too entrenched. The boundary they never enforced now feels impossible to restore. What began as one small incident became a culture of disrespect. In relationships, the cost is even heavier. Picture a partner who interrupts constantly, dismisses opinions, or belittles feelings. The other partner tells themselves it is not worth arguing. They minimize the hurt, saying, "That's just how they are." Each dismissal chips away at trust and self-esteem. The relationship becomes one-sided because only one person's voice and feelings matter. Over time, the partner who tolerates this treatment begins to doubt their worth. By allowing disrespect, they not only lose their voice but also reinforce the other person's behavior. What goes unchecked becomes a habit, and what becomes a habit becomes a dynamic. Friendships are not immune. Suppose a friend always shows up late, cancels plans at the last minute, or speaks harshly under the excuse of just being honest. The other person stays quiet, worried about being seen as difficult, but the silence communicates acceptance. The disrespectful friend continues, never reflecting on their actions because there are no consequences. Eventually, resentment builds, and the friendship either collapses under the weight of unspoken anger or continues in a hollow form where one person feels undervalued. Tolerating disrespect also shows up in families. A parent may dismiss an adult child's boundaries with comments like, "I'm your parent, I can say what I want." If the adult child accepts it without response, the pattern repeats. The parent continues to cross lines because no boundary is enforced. The adult child might justify it as avoiding conflict or showing respect, but in reality they are teaching that their own needs do not matter. The family dynamic grows lopsided, where one person's comfort overrides another's dignity. The roots of tolerating disrespect often lie in early lessons. Children who grow up in environments where speaking up led to punishment or dismissal learn to keep quiet. Others may have been told to be polite at all costs, to avoid conflict, or to prioritize harmony over truth. By adulthood, the habit of silence feels natural, even when it hurts. The belief that standing up for yourself is rude or selfish makes it harder to enforce boundaries. But boundaries are not about controlling others, they are about teaching others how to treat you. When you let someone cross them without consequence, you teach them that the line does not exist. Consider a social example. A group of friends goes out, and one person repeatedly makes cutting remarks to another. The target laughs it off to avoid awkwardness. The group sees no objection, so they assume it is harmless banter. The remarks continue, growing sharper over time. Soon, the person being mocked is known as the punchline of the group. They feel hurt but powerless because they allowed it to happen. The disrespect hardened into identity, and undoing it feels impossible. Yet the root of it was tolerance in the beginning. Tolerating disrespect also affects self-perception. Each time you let someone cross a line, you reinforce the belief that your needs are less important. You begin to see yourself the way others treat you. If you are dismissed, you internalize dismissal. If you are mocked, you start to believe the mockery. This erosion of self-worth makes it harder to speak up because you doubt your right to do so. The cycle deepens, and disrespect becomes not just an external issue but an internalized belief about what you deserve. There are also professional costs. An employee who tolerates being overworked without recognition sends the message that their time has no value. Employers continue to pile on tasks because they know the employee will not object. While others set boundaries and receive fair treatment, the one who tolerates disrespect is left drained. The irony is that tolerance is often mistaken for dedication, but dedication requires mutual respect, while tolerance of disrespect only fuels exploitation. In personal relationships, disrespect tolerated long enough often turns into abuse. What starts as dismissive comments can escalate into controlling behavior or emotional harm. The person on the receiving end may believe that keeping quiet prevents escalation, but silence signals acceptance. The disrespectful partner learns there are no consequences, and the behavior intensifies. By the time the victim recognizes the severity, they may feel trapped. Boundaries that were never enforced at the start are much harder to rebuild later. Even in daily, smaller interactions, tolerating disrespect shapes dynamics. If a colleague takes credit for your idea and you say nothing, they may do it again. If a neighbor speaks rudely and you ignore it, they may continue. These moments may seem minor, but they establish patterns. People test boundaries, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unconsciously. Your response teaches them whether the line is firm or flexible. The fear of confrontation often drives tolerance. Many people equate speaking up with starting a fight, but asserting a boundary does not require hostility. It can be as simple as saying, "I don't appreciate that," or "Please don't do that again." These words may feel uncomfortable, but they send a clear message. Discomfort in the moment protects respect in the long run. Avoiding discomfort protects nothing. It only deepens disrespect. Another factor is guilt. People often feel selfish for demanding respect. They tell themselves others did not mean harm or that they should be more forgiving. But forgiveness without accountability is not kindness, it is erasure. Respect is not a luxury to be earned. It is a basic expectation in every relationship. Accepting less does not make you generous. It makes you complicit in your own mistreatment. Tolerating disrespect erodes relationships because it prevents honesty. A friendship, partnership, or workplace built on silence cannot thrive. Respect requires boundaries. Boundaries require an enforcement. Each time you fail to enforce them, you trade self-worth for temporary peace. The trade never pays off. What you lose, dignity, trust, and self-respect, is far greater than what you gain. Disrespect grows in silence, and the longer it goes unchecked, the more it becomes the standard. The choice to tolerate may feel small, but its impact is lasting. Every time you let someone cross your boundaries, you teach them it is acceptable, and they learn the lesson quickly. Over-attachment to outcomes creates a trap that many people do not notice until they are caught in it. You work toward a goal, pour energy into it, and then judge your worth entirely by the result. If it goes well, you feel valuable. If it goes badly, you feel like a failure. The problem is not in striving for results, but in tying your identity to them. When worth depends on outcomes, every setback becomes more than a disappointment. It becomes proof in your mind that you are not enough. This constant equation of results with value creates a fragile sense of self that rises and falls with circumstances you cannot always control. Consider a student preparing for an important exam. They study hard, commit hours of focus, and enter the test with confidence. When the results come back lower than they hoped, they collapse internally. Instead of viewing it as one exam or as feedback for improvement, they see it as a reflection of their intelligence. A number on a page suddenly defines their worth. Their motivation weakens, not because they lack ability, but because they tied their sense of self to a single outcome. If the score had been high, they would have felt inflated pride. If low, they fall into shame. In both cases, the identity shifts with results rather than standing firm. Workplaces provide another clear example. Imagine an employee aiming for a promotion. They put in long hours, complete projects, and sacrifice rest. When the promotion goes to someone else, they do not just feel disappointed, they feel crushed. Their conclusion is not, "I worked hard, and the decision went another way." It is, "I failed. I am not worthy." The truth may involve office politics, timing, or management decisions outside their control, but over-attachment to the outcome blinds them to context. Their sense of self falls apart, and they may even lose confidence to continue at the same level of effort. Relationships reveal the same pattern. Someone may enter dating with the hope of building a long-term partnership. When a relationship ends, they do not just mourn the loss, they see it as evidence that they are unlovable. The outcome of the relationship becomes proof of their value as a person. This mindset can lead them to avoid future intimacy for fear of another failure. The truth is that relationships end for many reasons, but when worth is tied to outcome, every ending becomes a personal indictment. Athletics highlight this struggle in an obvious way. An athlete trains for months, prepares for competition, and comes in second place. Instead of seeing progress, they only see failure. The medal or score defines them. If they win, they feel alive. If they lose, they feel worthless. This over-attachment to results drains joy from the sport itself. Training becomes a chore, competition becomes a threat, and the love of the game disappears under pressure. What began as passion becomes punishment, because self-worth depends on victory. Even small daily goals reveal the same problem. Someone writes a to-do list for the day. At night, they complete 9 out of 10 tasks, but focus only on the unfinished one. Instead of feeling satisfied, they feel like a failure. The unchecked box outweighs everything they did accomplish. This habit turns daily life into a constant test, where success and failure hang on outcomes rather than on effort or growth. The roots of over-attachment often come from environments where results were rewarded more than effort. A child praised only for high grades, trophies, or visible achievements learns that love and approval are conditional. They carry this lesson into adulthood, where the equation of results with worth continues. Every result becomes a verdict. The person forgets how to measure themselves by persistence, integrity, or values. Instead, they wait for outcomes to tell them if they matter. Social pressures reinforce the trap. In a culture that glorifies success stories and highlights only wins, people absorb the message that results define identity. Social media amplifies this by displaying curated images of achievements, milestones, and accolades. When others appear to succeed constantly, the comparison makes personal setbacks feel heavier. The standard is no longer personal progress, but external validation measured through results. Over-attachment also creates fear of risk. If your worth depends on outcome, you will hesitate to try new things. Failure becomes too costly, not just in terms of results, but in terms of identity. An entrepreneur may sit on an idea for years, afraid to launch because if the business fails, they will see themselves as failures. A writer may refuse to share their work, fearing rejection will mean they are not good enough. Growth requires trial, but trial feels unbearable when the outcome defines you. The emotional cost is significant. Anxiety grows before every attempt, because the stakes are always personal. Setbacks feel like shame. Even success does not bring peace, because the fear of losing it looms. Each win only raises the pressure for the next outcome. The cycle becomes endless striving, followed by fleeting relief, then renewed fear. Instead of satisfaction, the person lives in constant tension. This mindset also distorts relationships with others. Someone who ties their worth to outcomes may resent or envy those who succeed. They may struggle to celebrate others' achievements because it reflects back on their own perceived shortcomings. They may also project the same pressure onto loved ones, valuing children or partners more when they achieve visible results. Relationships lose authenticity and become transactional, measured by what each person can produce. Consider a family example. A child brings home a drawing, proud of their creativity. If the parent responds with, "That's nice, but did you win the art contest?" The message is clear. Worth lies not in the act of creation, but in external recognition. The child learns early that results matter more than effort. As adults, they will likely repeat the same cycle, never feeling secure unless they are winning. Even in health, over-attachment shows up. Someone trying to exercise and eat better may step on the scale daily. If the number drops, they feel motivated. If it does not, they feel like failures. Their worth hinges on the result of a measurement, instead of the broader context of health. This leads to cycles of extreme dieting, burnout, and shame. The outcome dictates identity instead of progress guiding the journey. The danger of tying worth to results is that life is full of variables outside your control. Markets change, relationships shift, timing fails, health fluctuates. If you hinge your identity on outcomes, you tie your value to forces you cannot master. Every setback feels like proof of failure. Every delay feels like a flaw, and every rejection feels like rejection of you as a person. What should be one event becomes the definition of your entire self. Over-attachment to outcomes strips life of resilience. Resilience depends on seeing setbacks as part of growth, not as proof of inadequacy. Without it, you cannot recover, because recovery requires belief that your worth is intact, even when results are not. When you measure yourself only by outcome, you never feel safe. Success brings temporary relief, but no lasting confidence. Failure brings shame that feels permanent. In both cases, you live on a fragile foundation, where identity rises and falls with results, and setbacks feel like personal collapse rather than natural parts of the journey. Avoiding help often comes from the belief that strength means handling everything on your own. You tell yourself that needing support shows weakness, so you push through challenges in silence. On the surface, this looks like independence. Others may even admire your resilience. But what hides underneath is isolation. Refusing therapy, mentorship, or guidance does not make you stronger. It cuts you off from resources that could lighten the load and open new paths. The idea that you must solve everything alone becomes a barrier that keeps you stuck. Imagine someone struggling with anxiety. They feel constant worry, sleepless nights, and racing thoughts. Friends suggest therapy, but they dismiss it, saying, "I can handle it myself." They read self-help articles, distract themselves with work, and hope the anxiety will pass. Instead, it grows worse. Their relationships strain, their performance at work declines, and they feel more isolated than ever. What could have been addressed with professional guidance turns into years of silent suffering. The refusal to seek help does not protect them. It traps them in the very problem they are trying to escape. In the workplace, avoiding mentorship creates similar limitations. Picture an employee entering a new role. They have talent but little experience. Instead of asking seasoned colleagues for advice, they try to figure everything out on their own. They spend hours struggling with problems that could have been solved in minutes with guidance. Their progress slows and frustration builds. They think asking for help would show incompetence, but in reality, their silence prevents them from growing. Colleagues respect those who seek to learn. By avoiding mentorship, the employee delays development and misses chances to build stronger connections. Family life offers another example. A parent overwhelmed by childcare, household responsibilities, and work refuses to ask relatives or friends for support. They believe a good parent should manage everything without complaint. Over time, exhaustion leads to irritability and burnout. The children sense the stress, and the home becomes tense. If the parent had reached out for help, even small amounts of relief could have restored balance. Instead, the refusal to accept support spreads strain through the entire family. What looks like responsibility becomes self-neglect. The roots of avoiding help often lie in early messages about independence. Many people grow up hearing that they should not burden others, or that strong people handle problems alone. Others may have learned that asking for help leads to disappointment because no one came through when they needed it. By adulthood, they internalize the belief that support is either shameful or unreliable. They protect themselves by avoiding it altogether, even when it would make life better. Social pressures also reinforce the habit. Cultures that glorify self-sufficiency and individual achievement often frame help-seeking as weakness. The narrative of the self-made person suggests that true strength comes from facing struggles alone. This idea ignores the truth that every successful person has relied on others, teachers, mentors, partners, or communities. But the myth remains strong, leading many to believe that accepting help undermines their value. Consider someone facing grief after the loss of a loved one. Friends offer support, but they push it away, saying, "I'll be fine." They keep busy to avoid breaking down in front of others. The grief, unshared, grows heavier. Isolation deepens the pain. When people grieve together, they find comfort in shared understanding. Alone, the sorrow feels endless. Refusing support in this case does not preserve dignity. It prolongs suffering and robs the person of the connection that could have helped them heal. In education, avoiding help can derail progress. A student struggling with math might feel embarrassed to admit difficulty. Instead of asking the teacher for clarification, they remain silent. They fall further behind, and soon the subject feels impossible. Shame keeps them quiet, even as they sink. What began as a small gap could have been filled with a single question. By refusing help, they turn a temporary obstacle into a permanent barrier. Avoiding help also affects health. Someone may feel persistent physical symptoms, but avoid seeing a doctor. They tell themselves it is minor, or that they do not want to waste anyone's time. By the time they seek care, the condition may have advanced. The delay was not strength, it was denial disguised as independence. Health requires support from professionals, and refusing it out of pride or fear can cause real harm. Friendships weaken when people refuse help. Imagine a friend who notices you struggling and offers support. If you always decline, the friend eventually feels shut out. They stop offering, assuming you do not need them. The friendship grows distant, not because they do not care, but because you never allowed them in. Relationships thrive on mutual support. Avoiding help robs both people of the chance to strengthen the bond. The emotional cost of avoiding help is heavy. Carrying every burden alone leads to burnout. Without outside perspective, problems feel bigger than they are. Without guidance, mistakes repeat. Without connection, loneliness grows. The very things that could bring relief, advice, therapy, shared effort, are blocked by the belief that seeking them is weakness. In reality, help is a resource. Refusing it is like drowning, while insisting you can swim, even as the water rises. Even in small daily choices, the habit appears. Someone might carry every grocery bag at once, instead of asking for help, straining their body. Another may stay silent in a meeting rather than admit confusion, leaving them lost. Someone else may refuse to delegate tasks at work, convinced no one else can do it as well. Each of these choices creates unnecessary strain. Help exists but goes unused, and the person pays the cost in energy, stress, and missed opportunities. The danger of avoiding help is that it keeps you isolated. Alone, problems grow heavier. Alone, perspective narrows. Alone, solutions take longer. Asking for help does not mean losing independence. It means expanding your capacity by using the resources around you. Therapy offers tools for healing that you cannot always create on your own. Mentorship offers knowledge that would take years to discover by trial and error. Guidance from friends or family offers comfort and support that ease burdens. Refusing these things does not make you stronger. It makes you lonelier, more tired, and more stuck. Avoiding help is not resilience. It is a form of self-isolation disguised as independence. By refusing therapy, mentorship, or guidance, you deny yourself the relief and growth that come from shared wisdom and support. You teach yourself to live in silence when connection was available all along. Strength is not found in carrying everything alone. It is found in knowing when to reach out and allow others to walk with you through the weight. Romanticizing toxicity often begins with the belief that chaos means passion. Many people grow up seeing stormy relationships in movies, books, or even their own homes, where constant fighting, jealousy, and dramatic reunions are portrayed as signs of deep love. Over time, this idea embeds itself so deeply that calm and steady connections feel boring, while instability feels exciting. The truth is that chaos is not passion. It is a cycle of destruction disguised as intensity. When you equate love with volatility, you stay trapped in patterns that damage trust, self-esteem, and long-term stability. Imagine a couple who argue constantly. Their fights are loud, emotional, and draining. Yet, after every argument comes a tearful reconciliation. In those moments, the relief feels intoxicating. They tell themselves the highs are worth the lows, that this must be real love because they cannot stay away from each other. But what they are experiencing is not passion. It is the body's stress response, swinging from cortisol during conflict to dopamine and oxytocin during reunion. The cycle creates addiction to the relief, not connection through respect. Over time, the relationship erodes because it runs on conflict, not trust. Consider someone dating a partner who is unpredictable. One day they are affectionate and attentive, the next they are cold or dismissive. The inconsistency keeps the person hooked, always chasing the good days and trying to fix the bad ones. They confuse the intensity of the chase with love. In reality, the partner's behavior is manipulative or emotionally unavailable, and the relationship feeds on instability. By romanticizing this dynamic, the person convinces themselves that the roller coaster proves depth when it actually proves dysfunction. Popular culture reinforces this belief. Countless films and novels portray couples who fight, break up, and reunite as though turbulence equals destiny. Characters who treat each other poorly are framed as soulmates because they can't live without each other. This narrative seeps into expectations, making people question healthy, calm relationships. A steady partner who listens, communicates, and respects boundaries may feel dull compared to the fiery images of toxic passion. The problem is not the partner's lack of passion, it is the distorted lens that confuses drama with love. Family history often plants the first seeds of this belief. Children raised in households where yelling, silent treatments, or unpredictable affection were common may grow to see these dynamics as normal. As adults, they unconsciously seek partners who recreate the same patterns. The familiarity feels comfortable, even if it is painful. They may mistake the adrenaline of conflict for chemistry. Without recognizing this pattern, they repeat it, convincing themselves that the chaos proves intensity. The cost of romanticizing toxicity shows up in self-worth. A person who stays in these cycles begins to believe that love always hurts, that jealousy is proof of care, and that disrespect is just part of intimacy. They lose sight of their own value because they accept mistreatment as passion. Over time, they may stop expecting kindness, patience, or stability. Their standard becomes volatility. Anything healthier feels foreign or unworthy of pursuit. Friendships can reflect the same pattern. Imagine a friend who constantly creates drama, spreading rumors, demanding attention, or stirring conflict. You feel exhausted by the relationship, yet you convince yourself that the bond must be special because it is so intense. You excuse the chaos as part of what makes the friendship unique. The truth is that healthy friendships do not drain you. They support and ground you. Romanticizing the drama keeps you tied to someone who thrives on instability rather than mutual respect. In professional settings, a similar mindset can appear. Some employees idolize workplaces that demand endless hours, constant crisis management, and high-pressure environments. They equate the chaos with importance, as though stress proves value. Calm and organized systems may feel underwhelming in comparison. But glorifying the toxic cycle of burnout and recovery is not passion for work. It is self-destruction disguised as dedication. The same principle applies in personal life. Chaos may feel meaningful, but it erodes stability, health, and joy. The emotional roller coaster of toxic relationships often creates chemical reinforcement in the brain. Conflict spikes stress hormones, while reconciliation releases bonding chemicals. This cycle can feel addictive, similar to withdrawal and reward. People trapped in these patterns may even describe their relationships as addictive. They cannot leave, not because of genuine love, but because they crave the relief after conflict. Believing this is passion blinds them to the reality that they are stuck in a destructive loop. Consider a person who repeatedly returns to a partner who disrespects them. Friends and family question the choice, but the person insists, "You don't understand, we have such a strong connection." What they are describing is not strength but intensity. The chaos creates big feelings, and those feelings are mistaken for love. In reality, love that lasts does not require constant repair. It requires stability, respect, and trust, qualities that rarely appear in relationships built on toxic cycles. The danger of romanticizing toxicity is that it lowers your standard for what you accept. You start to believe that love without jealousy is not real, that a relationship without fights lacks depth, or that calm equals boredom. This mindset blinds you to healthy partners and keeps you tied to destructive ones. You ignore red flags because you see them as signs of intensity rather than warnings. Over time, you teach yourself that pain is the price of passion, when in fact it is only the price of dysfunction. Even small daily examples show how this belief plays out. Someone might excuse a partner's possessiveness as proof of love. They might defend constant arguments by saying, "At least we care enough to fight." They might reject a steady partner because the lack of drama feels strange. Each choice reinforces the idea that chaos equals connection. Each defense keeps them locked in the cycle. Romanticizing toxicity does not only hurt the person caught in it, it ripples outward to friends, family, and future generations. Children who watch parents stay in toxic relationships absorb the same lessons. Friends who listen to repeated stories of turmoil feel helpless. The cycle does not stay private. It spreads, shaping expectations for what love looks like. Believing chaos equals passion keeps you locked in destructive cycles. The highs feel powerful, the lows feel crushing, and the pattern repeats because it seems meaningful. But love built on respect, patience, and stability may not have the same dramatic swings, yet it creates something toxic relationships never can: safety, trust, and peace. Without those, passion is only turbulence, and turbulence eventually wears down even the strongest hearts. Ignoring rest often feels like commitment. You convince yourself that pushing harder proves discipline, that working late or grinding through fatigue shows strength. In many environments, this belief is even praised. Colleagues admire long hours, managers reward visible sacrifice, and friends describe you as dedicated. But the body and mind keep score. Rest is not optional recovery. It is a necessary part of performance and well-being. When you ignore it, the cost builds slowly at first, then shows up in ways you cannot avoid. Grinding without recovery does not make you stronger. It wears you down until you break. Imagine a student preparing for final exams. They study late into the night, fueled by caffeine, telling themselves sleep is wasted time. For a few days, the approach seems to work. They cover more material, stay awake longer, and feel proud of their effort. But as days pass, their memory weakens, their focus scatters, and their emotions fray. On exam day, they find themselves blanking on questions they knew the answers to a week earlier. Their performance suffers not because they lacked ability, but because they sacrificed rest. The hours gained in study were lost in retention. Workplaces reinforce the same mistake. Picture an employee chasing a deadline. They skip breaks, eat at their desk, and log hours late into the night. Their productivity looks high at first, but errors begin to creep into their work. They miss details, forget steps, and rely on rework to fix mistakes. Their efficiency drops, even as their effort increases. What seemed like commitment becomes counterproductive. By ignoring rest, they turn energy into exhaustion and sharpness into dullness. Athletes understand this dynamic clearly. Training hard builds strength, but recovery is what allows the body to grow. A runner who trains every day without rest risks injury. Muscles tear, joints strain, and performance drops. Coaches emphasize rest days not as laziness, but as part of the training plan. Without them, progress stalls or reverses. Yet outside of athletics, many people forget this principle. They believe constant motion equals growth, not realizing that recovery is what makes growth sustainable. In family life, ignoring rest strains relationships. Consider a parent who works long hours, manages household responsibilities, and sacrifices sleep to keep everything running. They believe they are holding the family together by staying active, but exhaustion leaves them irritable, impatient, and distant. Their children may feel tension instead of connection. Their partner may sense absence instead of support. The lack of rest undermines the very relationships they are working to protect. The intention is good, but the outcome is harm. The health effects of ignoring rest are well documented. Sleep deprivation impairs memory, weakens the immune system, and raises the risk of chronic illnesses such as heart disease and diabetes. Constant stress without recovery fuels anxiety and depression. The body is not designed for endless strain. It needs cycles of effort and restoration. Ignoring those cycles is like driving a car without ever stopping for fuel or maintenance. It may run for a while, but eventually it breaks down. Cultural pressures often push people toward this mistake. In many societies, productivity is glorified, while rest is treated as laziness. People brag about working 70-hour weeks or surviving on 4 hours of sleep. They frame exhaustion as a badge of honor. This belief is reinforced by systems that reward output but ignore sustainability. Workers who burn out are replaced quickly, leaving little incentive to prioritize rest. But the cost does not vanish. It appears in turnover, mistakes, and long-term health issues. Even small examples show the danger. Someone who skips lunch breaks to keep working may think they are saving time. In reality, their energy dips, their focus drifts, and the afternoon becomes less productive. Another person who stays up late scrolling on their phone robs themselves of recovery, leaving the next day sluggish and unfocused. Over time, these small sacrifices add up, creating a baseline of fatigue that feels normal but reduces quality of life. Ignoring rest also affects creativity. The brain needs downtime to connect ideas and process information. Many breakthroughs happen not at the desk, but during a walk, a shower, or a moment of quiet. By filling every hour with work, you rob yourself of the space where insight emerges. Creativity withers under constant pressure, because the mind cannot generate freely when it is overloaded. Rest is not just for recovery, it is for renewal. Relationships reflect this truth as well. A friend who is always too busy, too tired, or too distracted by work cannot be fully present. Over time, connections weaken. Loved ones may stop reaching out because they know the answer will always be, "I'm too busy." The cost of ignoring rest is not only personal burnout but also social isolation. People drift away when you are never available, and relationships that could provide support fade. The irony is that many people ignore rest in pursuit of success, yet rest is what makes success possible. A well-rested mind solves problems faster. A well-rested body performs better. A balanced schedule allows for long-term growth instead of short-term surges followed by collapse. By refusing rest, you trade future capacity for temporary output. It is like spending all your savings at once without a plan for tomorrow. Consider an entrepreneur launching a business. They work around the clock, skipping meals and ignoring sleep to build momentum. At first, the energy feels exhilarating, but after months of neglect, their health declines, decision-making suffers, relationships strain, and mistakes pile up. The business falters not from lack of effort but from unsustainable effort. If they had paced themselves with rest, they might have built something lasting. Instead, the grind consumed them before success could take root. Even in emergencies, rest matters. Medical professionals working long shifts often show reduced accuracy in diagnoses and slower responses. Truck drivers who push past fatigue put lives at risk. In these fields, ignoring rest can mean the difference between safety and disaster. The human body has limits, and pretending those limits do not exist does not erase them. It only increases the chance of breakdown. The danger of ignoring rest is that the effects build quietly. Fatigue becomes your normal state. Irritability feels like part of your personality. Forgetfulness seems like a quirk, but these are signs of depletion. Without recovery, the body and mind deteriorate slowly until they reach a breaking point. Burnout, illness, or collapse often feels sudden, but it is the result of years of neglect. Rest is not indulgence, it is maintenance. It is the reset that allows you to continue, the pause that makes effort meaningful, the balance that sustains both body and mind. Ignoring it may let you push a little farther today, but it guarantees you will not make it as far tomorrow. The grind without recovery is not strength. It is slow self-destruction disguised as dedication. Escaping through numbing is a habit that many people fall into without even realizing it. When feelings of sadness, anger, fear, or loneliness rise, instead of facing them, you reach for something that takes the edge off. It might be food that comforts, alcohol that relaxes, social media that distracts, or work that consumes your attention. In the moment, the relief feels real. You silence the discomfort and convince yourself the problem has shrunk. But the truth is that numbing does not remove pain. It only buries it, and buried feelings do not disappear. They wait, deepen, and return with more weight each time. Imagine someone going through a breakup. The grief feels heavy, the silence of their home unbearable. Instead of sitting with the sadness or talking to a trusted friend, they throw themselves into late nights at the office. Work keeps them from thinking about the loss. At first, this seems productive. They receive praise for their dedication and tell themselves they are moving on. Yet, months later, the grief resurfaces in moments of exhaustion, irritability, or sudden tears. The work never healed the wound. It only delayed the feeling, which now returns stronger because it has been ignored. Food often becomes another way to numb. Someone who feels anxious may reach for snacks late at night. The act of eating provides comfort, a distraction from the unsettled feelings. But afterward, guilt or physical discomfort sets in, creating new layers of emotion. The original anxiety remains, and now it is joined by shame. The numbing attempt not only failed, but also added more pain to the cycle. Over time, emotional eating can become a pattern that erodes health without ever addressing the real source of distress. Alcohol is another common tool for numbing. Consider someone who feels isolated after moving to a new city. Instead of reaching out, building community, or exploring ways to connect, they pour a drink each evening. The alcohol quiets the loneliness, but only temporarily. The next day, the feelings return, often heavier because they were avoided. If the habit continues, the body becomes dependent, and the attempt to manage emotions through drinking turns into addiction. The original loneliness remains unresolved, buried beneath layers of escape that only deepen the problem. Social media provides one of the most accessible forms of numbing. A person feeling unfulfilled in their own life scrolls endlessly through the lives of others. The distraction is constant, filling every quiet moment, but comparison soon adds to the emptiness. They see curated images of other people's successes, travels, or relationships, and feel even less satisfied. What began as a distraction becomes fuel for more pain. The scrolling numbs in the moment, but amplifies the very feelings it was meant to hide. Work can be one of the most deceptive forms of numbing, because society praises it. Someone grieving, anxious, or struggling with conflict may bury themselves in long hours, endless projects, or new goals. They look successful to others, but inside they are avoiding emotions that demand attention. The unprocessed feelings eventually show up as burnout, strained relationships, or sudden breakdowns. Work looks noble, but when used as escape, it becomes another wall between you and your own truth. The problem with numbing is that it interrupts the natural process of feeling and healing. Emotions exist for a reason. Sadness signals loss and the need for care. Anger signals a boundary crossed. Fear signals danger or uncertainty. When you numb instead of listen, you silence the message without addressing the cause. The emotions remain unresolved, building pressure inside you. Like a container with a sealed lid, the pressure grows until it bursts in unexpected ways: an angry outburst, an anxiety attack, or a collapse into exhaustion. Consider a person who avoids grief after losing a parent. They keep busy, use distractions, and tell themselves they are fine. Years later, they find themselves breaking down at small triggers, unable to explain the depth of their emotion. The grief did not vanish, It waited, stored in the body and mind, until it found a way out. Numbing delayed the process, but it could not erase the need to feel and process the loss. Numbing also damages relationships. When you escape into alcohol, screens, or work, you create distance from others. A partner may feel shut out, a friend may sense you are absent, or children may notice your lack of presence. The very connections that could support you during difficult emotions weaken because you are unavailable. Over time, isolation deepens, and the pain grows because you are left without the bonds that could have offered comfort and perspective. Even small daily choices show how numbing builds. Someone stressed after work may binge-watch television for hours, avoiding thought. At first it feels harmless, but soon evenings blur together, problems go unaddressed, and life feels stagnant. Another person might use constant busyness, running errands, cleaning, or staying on the move to avoid stillness. The activity looks productive, but it hides the discomfort of being alone with feelings. In both cases, the escape prevents growth. The cycle of numbing often creates shame. People know on some level that they are avoiding feelings, but they judge themselves for it. They say, "I should be stronger," or "I'm weak for needing this." The shame fuels more avoidance, and the cycle deepens. The person now struggles with the original emotion and the guilt of how they handled it. This double weight makes it harder to break free. The irony is that facing feelings is often less painful than the constant effort to avoid them. Sitting with sadness, anger, or fear may feel uncomfortable in the moment, but it allows the emotion to move through you. Avoiding it prolongs the discomfort indefinitely. A wave of grief may pass in days or weeks if acknowledged. Left unaddressed, it can linger for years, resurfacing in destructive ways. Children who grow up watching parents numb emotions often learn to do the same. A child who sees a parent reach for alcohol after conflict learns that feelings are handled through escape. As adults, they may repeat the pattern without questioning it. The cycle of avoidance passes from one generation to the next, teaching silence instead of expression, denial instead of healing. The body also carries the weight of numbed feelings. Unprocessed stress can show up as headaches, stomach issues, or chronic pain. The nervous system reacts to emotions whether or not you acknowledge them. By numbing, you silence the mind, but not the body. The signals shift form, but do not disappear. Over time, this creates health issues that cannot be explained by physical causes alone. Because the root lies in avoided emotions, escaping through numbing feels safe, but it is a trap. Food, alcohol, social media, and work may ease discomfort for a moment, but they keep emotions unresolved. Instead of shrinking, the feelings deepen. Instead of healing, the cycle repeats. The temporary relief costs long-term peace. Facing emotions directly may feel harder, but it is the only path that moves you forward. Numbing is not strength, it is delay, and the more you delay, the heavier the weight becomes when it finally demands to be felt. Confusing busyness with progress is one of the most common traps in modern life. The calendar is full, the to-do list never ends, and every hour of the day is accounted for. On the surface, this looks like productivity. You feel accomplished because you are always in motion. Yet when you pause to reflect, you realize that despite all the activity, little has actually changed. The busy schedule may keep you occupied, but it does not guarantee growth. Sometimes it even hides avoidance, filling space so you do not have to face harder truths or decisions. Imagine someone who wants to change careers but feels overwhelmed by fear of failure. Instead of focusing on building skills, updating a resume, or networking, they spend hours organizing their desk, answering low-priority emails, and attending meetings. Their day feels packed, but none of it brings them closer to the goal. They convince themselves they are making progress because they are always active. In reality, they are circling the problem, using busyness to avoid the discomfort of direct action. Workplaces often reward this illusion. Employees who stay late, attend every meeting, and send constant updates are praised as dedicated. But being visible and busy does not equal effectiveness. One employee may attend 10 meetings, but contribute little. Another may spend a quiet afternoon solving a major problem and create far more value. Yet the culture often glorifies the first type of worker because busyness is easier to measure than true progress. Over time, this reinforces the habit of filling time instead of focusing on meaningful outcomes. In personal life, the same pattern appears. Picture a parent who signs their children up for every activity, sports, music lessons, clubs, while also volunteering, hosting gatherings, and working long hours. The schedule is full, from morning to night, but the family rarely sits down together, and the parent feels drained. The appearance of being engaged hides the fact that relationships are neglected. Busyness provides the illusion of purpose, but leaves a gap where true connection should be. Students often fall into this trap as well. A college student may spend hours highlighting textbooks, rewriting notes, and creating elaborate study guides. These activities look productive, but when the test arrives, they struggle to recall key concepts. The focus was on activity, not mastery. The student confused being occupied with making progress. The time spent was real, but the growth was not. Busyness can also be a shield against facing emotions. Someone going through grief might fill their schedule with tasks, social events, or projects. They tell themselves they are staying strong, but in truth they are avoiding the silence where grief would surface. The activity keeps the feelings at bay for a while, but unresolved emotions remain. When the schedule slows, the grief rushes back with full force. What looked like resilience was avoidance dressed as productivity. Technology makes the problem worse. Constant notifications and digital tasks create endless chances to stay busy. Checking email, scrolling through messages, and updating platforms feel urgent, but they rarely contribute to long-term goals. People spend hours moving information around, without actually moving forward. The sense of urgency keeps them hooked, but the outcome is shallow progress at best and wasted time at worst. Consider an entrepreneur starting a business. Instead of focusing on product development or customer research, they spend weeks designing logos, adjusting websites, and attending networking events. These tasks feel safe because they are concrete and visible. The harder work, facing customer rejection, testing ideas, or refining strategy, gets delayed. The entrepreneur convinces themselves they are working hard, but in reality they are hiding in tasks that create the appearance of progress without addressing the risks that matter. The roots of this confusion often lie in how society equates effort with worth. From a young age, people are taught to stay busy, to keep working, and to avoid idleness. Rest is seen as laziness, and activity is praised regardless of its impact. As adults, this conditioning makes it hard to slow down or focus. If you are not busy, you feel guilty. If you are busy, you feel validated. Even if you are not moving toward anything meaningful. Relationships can also be damaged by this mindset. A partner who fills every evening with tasks or obligations may avoid deeper conversations. They tell themselves they are being productive, but the relationship grows distant. Busyness becomes a barrier to intimacy. Instead of sitting with vulnerability, the person hides behind activity. Over time, this avoidance erodes trust and connection. Even as the schedule looks full, health suffers as well. Constant busyness without real progress creates stress and burnout. People sacrifice sleep, nutrition, and exercise to maintain full schedules. The irony is that the sacrifices often do not lead to meaningful results. Someone might work long hours but still feel unfulfilled because the work did not align with their true goals. The body pays the cost of constant motion, while the mind feels empty from lack of direction. The danger of confusing busyness with progress is that it prevents reflection. When every hour is filled, you do not have time to ask whether the activities matter. You move from one task to the next, never pausing to consider whether the energy spent brings you closer to your values or goals. This lack of reflection keeps you stuck in cycles where you repeat the same actions without change. The wheel spins but you do not move forward. Even small examples show this clearly. Someone may spend hours cleaning their home, reorganizing shelves, and making lists while ignoring the difficult conversation they need to have with a partner. Another person may fill weekends with errands to avoid thinking about their dissatisfaction at work. The activities provide temporary relief from discomfort, but the real issues remain untouched. The busyness is not progress. It is distraction. The irony is that progress often requires less activity, not more. It requires focus on a few meaningful actions rather than scattering energy across dozens of tasks, but focusing means facing discomfort, risk of failure, rejection, or slow results. Busyness feels safer because it keeps you moving without confronting those risks. Yet safety without progress is stagnation, dressed as productivity. Confusing busyness with progress is like running on a treadmill. You expend energy, sweat, and effort, but you remain in the same place. The motion convinces you that you are advancing, but when you step off, you realize nothing has changed. Real progress comes from direction, reflection, and deliberate steps forward, not from filling time with endless activity. Without that awareness, you may live a life that looks full but feels empty, always busy but never truly moving ahead. Refusing to let go is one of the heaviest forms of self-sabotage. You hold on to relationships, jobs, or identities long after they have stopped serving you, believing that clinging gives you stability. In reality, the grip only drains your energy. Instead of building a future, you spend your strength feeding the past. What once gave you meaning now weighs you down. Letting go feels terrifying because it feels like loss, but refusing to release what is broken prevents you from ever gaining something new. Imagine someone staying in a relationship that has grown toxic. There are constant arguments, unmet needs, and a lack of respect. Yet the person stays because they fear being alone, or because they invested years into the partnership. They tell themselves leaving would waste all that time, but by staying, they waste the future. Every day in that relationship is a day that could be spent building something healthier. The refusal to let go feels like loyalty, but it is actually self-abandonment. The same pattern plays out in careers. A person may stay in a job they dislike for decades because it feels secure. They dread Mondays, complain constantly, and fantasize about other paths, but they do not move. They fear losing their identity as someone stable, employed, or respected in that field. Over time, the fear of change outweighs the pain of staying. The job becomes a cage disguised as safety. The salary may cover expenses, but the cost is energy, health, and passion. By refusing to let go, they trade possibility for stagnation. Identities can be just as binding as relationships or jobs. Someone may define themselves by past success, an athlete who once excelled, an executive who once held a high role, or a student who once earned top grades. Years later, they cling to that version of themselves, unable to adapt to who they are now. The attachment blinds them to growth. They measure themselves against a former peak, never realizing that life holds new forms of value. By refusing to release an old identity, they block themselves from forming a new one. Family dynamics often deepen this struggle. A child raised to be the peacemaker in a troubled home may carry that role into adulthood, always sacrificing their own needs to keep harmony. They cling to the identity of caretaker, even when it harms them. Letting go of that role feels like betrayal, but holding on to it keeps them trapped in unhealthy patterns. What protected them as a child becomes destructive as an adult. Consider someone who loses a business venture. Instead of acknowledging the failure and moving forward, they spend years trying to revive it. They pour more money, time, and energy into something that no longer works. Pride keeps them tied to the project. They fear admitting it is over. The refusal to let go drains resources that could be used to build something new. The sunk cost becomes a trap that consumes the future. Friendships also show the cost of clinging. Imagine a bond that was once strong but has grown distant. The other person no longer shows interest or respect, yet you keep reaching out. You justify it by saying the history is too deep to walk away from. In reality, the friendship no longer exists in the present. By holding on, you exhaust yourself trying to revive something that has ended. The energy could be used to build new connections, but instead it is poured into the past. Health can suffer under this refusal. Stress from staying in the wrong relationship or job manifests in the body as fatigue, headaches, or illness. The mind grows heavy with resentment and regret. You replay what was lost instead of imagining what could be. The body pays the cost for clinging to what no longer fits. Letting go is not just emotional, it is physical survival. The fear of letting go is often tied to uncertainty. The mind convinces you that the known pain is safer than the unknown future. You would rather suffer with what you understand than face the risk of something new. But the irony is that holding on does not protect you, it prolongs suffering. The unknown may hold possibility, but the known holds only what you already have: dissatisfaction, regret, and exhaustion. Social pressures add to the struggle. People stay in marriages because they fear judgment, in jobs because they fear seeming unstable, in identities because they fear disappointing family. They tie their worth to the approval of others, clinging to appearances even as they suffer inside. But appearances cannot sustain a life. Eventually the cracks show, the refusal to let go becomes visible, and others may see what you tried to hide all along. Even small daily examples reflect this habit. Someone may keep clothes that no longer fit, clutter that no longer serves, or routines that no longer bring value. They hold on to these things because they remind them of who they were, or because letting go feels wasteful. But the clutter fills space that could be used for something better. The small reflects the large. Refusing to release the old prevents you from making room for the new. Relationships reveal this most painfully. Imagine someone clinging to a partner who has already left emotionally. They beg, plead, or compromise themselves to keep the connection alive. Every effort drains them more. The partner offers little in return, but the person cannot let go. They mistake endurance for love. They forget that real love requires reciprocity. Their refusal to release becomes a slow erosion of their dignity. The danger of refusing to let go is that you begin to confuse endurance with strength. You tell yourself that holding on proves loyalty or toughness. But true strength is not in clinging. It is in knowing when something has ended, and having the courage to face the void that follows. By refusing, you spend your life tied to what is broken, feeding the past with the energy that could build a future. The loss is not just of time but of self, because you shape your identity around something that no longer exists. Refusing to let go clings to illusions, drains energy, and creates stagnation. Relationships, jobs, and identities that have ended still consume you because you cannot release them. What once gave meaning becomes a weight that keeps you tied to yesterday. Each day you hold on, you trade possibility for memory, strength for fear, and growth for regret. The refusal does not preserve what was, it only erodes what could be. Believing that vulnerability equals weakness is one of the most damaging ideas people carry. It comes from a culture that praises toughness, control, and composure, while discouraging openness and emotional honesty. When you adopt the belief that showing your feelings makes you fragile, you learn to shut them down. At first, this seems protective. You avoid judgment, shield yourself from rejection, and maintain the image of strength. But over time, the wall you build to protect yourself also blocks intimacy, connection, and growth. What feels like safety is actually isolation. Imagine someone in a relationship who avoids sharing when they feel hurt. Their partner says something careless, but instead of admitting the sting, they shrug it off. They think silence shows strength and avoids conflict. Over time, the partner senses distance but does not know why. Resentment builds quietly, and the bond weakens. The refusal to be vulnerable prevents the couple from resolving small issues before they grow. What began as self-protection becomes the seed of disconnection. Friendships work the same way. A person may join a group but keep their true feelings hidden. They joke, share surface-level details, and act like everything is fine. The friends accept this mask because they do not see what is beneath. The person longs for deeper connection but refuses to risk vulnerability. Eventually they feel lonely even in company. They may conclude that people do not care, when in reality, no one was given the chance to connect with their real self. The wall of invulnerability ensured isolation while disguising it as independence. In the workplace, vulnerability often carries stigma. Employees may avoid admitting mistakes or asking for help, fearing it will damage their reputation. Consider someone who struggles with a new assignment, but stays silent. They work late nights, make errors, and grow stressed, all to avoid looking weak. If they had admitted their need for support, they could have learned, grown, and built trust with colleagues. Instead, they chose silence, and the opportunity for growth was lost. Vulnerability would have built respect, not destroyed it. The roots of equating vulnerability with weakness often lie in childhood. Children who were told stop crying or be tough learn that showing emotions is shameful. Boys in particular may be told that tears are unmanly, while girls may be told that anger is unacceptable. By adulthood, these lessons shape behavior. You learn to present only the emotions that others accept, burying the rest. The cost is authenticity. You lose access to your full emotional range, which is essential for real connection. Cultural messages reinforce this belief. Movies and stories often glorify the stoic hero who faces adversity without flinching. Leaders are portrayed as unshakable, always in control. Rarely do we see vulnerability portrayed as strength. Yet in real life, leaders who admit uncertainty or show emotion often earn greater trust. People connect with honesty, not perfection, but the myth of toughness remains, leading many to equate vulnerability with weakness rather than courage. Consider an example of grief. Someone loses a loved one but refuses to cry in front of others. They present a calm face, insisting they are fine. Friends admire their composure, but inside the grief festers. By not sharing, they deny themselves the support that could ease the burden. They also send the message that vulnerability is not acceptable, which may prevent others from opening up as well. What looks like strength creates loneliness, for both them and those around them. Romantic relationships highlight the cost most clearly. Intimacy requires openness, sharing fears, hopes, and insecurities. If one partner believes vulnerability equals weakness, they hold back. They may provide affection but avoid exposing deeper layers. The relationship stalls at surface level. Conflicts remain unresolved because honesty feels unsafe. Over time, the other partner may withdraw, sensing the lack of emotional depth. What could have been a bond of trust becomes shallow, all because vulnerability was mistaken for fragility. Even in small daily moments, the habit shows. Someone who feels nervous before a presentation hides it with forced confidence. Another who feels joy holds back from expressing it, fearing judgment. A person who feels anxious about an upcoming change stays silent, pretending calm. Each of these moments looks like control, but in reality they block authentic connection. Vulnerability would have invited understanding, encouragement, or support. Instead, silence ensures isolation. The irony is that vulnerability requires more courage than suppression. It takes strength to admit uncertainty, to share feelings, or to risk rejection. Anyone can build a wall and hide. Few can expose themselves and trust that they will be accepted. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is an act of bravery. It opens the door to genuine relationships, creativity, and resilience. Without it, life becomes safer but smaller, stripped of depth and authenticity. Think of an artist who shares their work. They risk criticism, rejection, or indifference. Yet by exposing their inner world, they create the possibility of connection. Their art may inspire, comfort, or challenge others. Without vulnerability, the work would never exist. Creativity thrives on openness, not protection. The same is true for innovation in any field. New ideas often feel fragile at first. Sharing them requires risk. Without that risk, progress stalls. Families also benefit from vulnerability. When a parent admits they made a mistake, they model honesty for their children. When siblings share fears, they grow closer. Vulnerability builds trust because it shows authenticity. Without it, families may look strong on the outside, but feel fractured inside. The refusal to be open prevents healing, forgiveness, and growth. Avoiding vulnerability also affects self-understanding. When you suppress emotions, you deny yourself the chance to process them. Feelings do not vanish because you ignore them. They turn inward, often surfacing as anxiety, depression, or physical symptoms. Vulnerability is not just about relationships with others, it is about your relationship with yourself. By avoiding openness, you avoid your own truth, which keeps you from growing. The belief that vulnerability equals weakness keeps people stuck in shallow interactions, fragile identities, and cycles of suppression. Shutting down emotions may feel safe, but it blocks intimacy, connection, and growth. The wall built to protect you becomes the cage that confines you. What looks like strength is isolation in disguise, and what feels like safety is actually loss of the deeper bonds that make life meaningful. Over-identifying with work is a trap that often feels like purpose but functions more like dependence. When your entire sense of self rests on what you do rather than who you are, you build an identity that is fragile and conditional. As long as the job is secure, the projects succeed, and the recognition comes, you feel valuable. But if the title disappears, the company changes, or failure arrives, your sense of worth collapses with it. Tying identity to productivity turns a job into a lifeline, and when that lifeline is cut, you are left questioning who you are without it. Imagine someone who spends years climbing the corporate ladder. Their life revolves around work, long hours, constant travel, and endless commitment. They introduce themselves not by their name or interests, but by their position. Colleagues admire them, and family points to them with pride. But when a sudden restructuring leads to layoffs, their role disappears. The shock is not just financial, it is existential. Without the job, they no longer know who they are. Their identity has dissolved because it was tied to something external and temporary. This happens in many professions. A doctor who has spent decades practicing may struggle deeply upon retirement, not because they lack financial resources, but because their identity was built entirely on being a doctor. Without patients to see or problems to solve, they feel irrelevant. An athlete who retires after a career of competition may feel lost, unable to see value in themselves outside of performance. A teacher, praised for dedication, may feel invisible once they leave the classroom. In each case, the danger lies not in losing the job, but in losing the self that was fused with it. Work cultures often reinforce this over-identification. Companies reward those who give more than their time, who make work the center of their lives. Employees are praised for loyalty, availability, and sacrifice. The message becomes clear: the more you tie your identity to the job, the more valuable you appear. Over time, you internalize this message, believing that your worth depends on output. Vacations feel like laziness, hobbies feel indulgent, and relationships become secondary. The job title becomes the answer to every question of who you are. Consider someone in a social setting. When asked about themselves, they default to describing their work. Their friends know their job achievements, but not their inner life, passions, or struggles. If the job vanishes, the conversations falter because they have nothing else to share. Their sense of identity was reduced to a single role, leaving them unprepared for change. The same applies internally. When you think of yourself only as a worker, you lose touch with parts of yourself that are independent of labor. Over-identification with work also harms relationships. A parent who ties identity to career may justify endless hours at the office, telling themselves they are providing for the family, but children may grow up feeling unseen. A partner may feel secondary to deadlines and projects. The relationship becomes strained because the person cannot separate self from productivity. Even when present at home, their mind is at work. Over time, those bonds weaken, leaving the person more tied to their job than to the people who matter most. The cost shows up in health as well. If you define yourself by productivity, you push through exhaustion, illness, or burnout, because stopping feels like losing identity. Rest becomes threatening, because it means stepping away from the one thing that defines you. This leads to chronic stress, physical breakdown, and mental fatigue. The body sends signals to stop, but the fear of losing identity drowns them out. Eventually, the collapse is not just physical but personal, because the self you have built cannot survive outside of constant work. Society adds to this problem by glorifying achievement. People are celebrated for titles, awards, and accomplishments. Obituaries often list careers first, as though the measure of a life lies in what someone did rather than who they were. This cultural emphasis makes it easy to believe that without a role or title, you have no worth. It trains people to seek validation through output, even at the expense of balance. Think of a small business owner who builds a company from scratch. Their identity fuses with the business. They are not just running it, they are it. Every success feels personal, and every failure feels like a reflection of their worth. If the business fails, they do not just lose income, they feel as though they have lost themselves. This over-identification can lead to despair because their self was never separated from their work. Even students experience this dynamic. A young person who excels academically may be known as the smart one, Their identity becomes grades and performance. When they encounter failure for the first time, they feel shattered. They have no sense of self outside of achievement, so a single setback feels like proof of worthlessness. This mindset often carries into adulthood, where productivity becomes the only acceptable measure of identity. Over-identifying with work also limits growth. When your identity is tied to one role, you resist change because it threatens who you are. Someone who sees themselves only as a lawyer may ignore opportunities to explore other interests or skills. Someone who identifies solely as a manager may fear stepping into a different field. The attachment to one role makes flexibility impossible, even when life demands it. Instead of adapting, you cling, and the clinging creates stagnation. Consider the impact of retirement in societies where work defines identity. Many retirees report feelings of depression and worthlessness, not because they lack resources, but because they lost the role that anchored them. They discover too late that they neglected to build an identity outside of work. Their days feel empty because they never learned to see value in themselves beyond productivity. The emotional toll of over-identification with work is heavy. Every setback feels personal. A failed project is not just a professional obstacle, but an attack on your sense of self. Every critique feels like a rejection of who you are. Praise inflates you, but only temporarily, because your worth depends on external feedback. You live in a fragile state, always at the mercy of outcomes you cannot fully control. Even small disruptions can feel catastrophic. Someone who identifies as a manager may feel lost during a temporary leave. Someone who defines themselves by job performance may spiral when sick and unable to work. The loss of identity in those moments highlights the danger of tying self-worth to productivity. Life is unpredictable, and if your entire self rests on one role, any disruption can unravel you. Over-identifying with work is seductive because it gives a clear, structured answer to the question of who you are. But it is also dangerous because it builds your identity on shifting ground. Titles can vanish, companies can collapse, and careers can change. When that happens, the person who has tied their self entirely to productivity is left empty. The work may be gone, but the cost is deeper, the loss of self that was never separate from the job. Suppressing anger may feel like control, but it is more like storing fuel in a container with cracks. You convince yourself that holding it in shows maturity, that silence prevents conflict, or that others will respect you more if you do not react. The truth is that bottled rage never disappears. It leaks into your words, actions, and health. You may not raise your voice, but the anger shows up as resentment, sarcasm, cold withdrawal, or even self-harm. What you believe you are burying quietly is actually shaping how you live and how others experience you. Imagine someone in a workplace where a colleague constantly takes credit for their ideas. Each time it happens, they grit their teeth and say nothing. They tell themselves it is not worth the fight. On the surface, they remain calm, but underneath, anger grows. Soon, their tone toward the colleague turns sharp, their patience thins, and they withdraw from collaboration. The suppressed anger changes the dynamic, even though it was never spoken. Eventually, their resentment affects not only the colleague, but their performance and relationships with the entire team. In families, suppression often creates distance. Picture a partner who feels hurt when their spouse dismisses their opinion. Instead of voicing the anger, they stay quiet to keep the peace. Over time, the anger turns into passive resistance. They stop engaging fully, make sarcastic remarks, or retreat emotionally. The spouse senses the shift, but cannot name the problem, because it was never expressed directly. The anger that was meant to be hidden ends up creating more tension than an honest conversation would have. Children raised in households where anger was unsafe often learn suppression early. If a child expressed frustration and was punished, shamed, or ignored, they learned that anger must stay hidden. As adults, they repeat the pattern. When conflict arises, they swallow their feelings, believing that anger itself is dangerous. But the anger does not vanish. It festers, shaping their interactions in subtle but powerful ways. They may find themselves snapping at minor irritations, criticizing harshly, or turning anger inward in the form of self-blame. The body also pays the price of suppressed anger. Stress hormones released during anger remain in the system when the emotion is never expressed or processed. Over time, this contributes to high blood pressure, tension headaches, digestive issues, and sleep problems. The physical symptoms may not be recognized as anger, but they are the body's way of carrying unresolved emotion. By refusing to acknowledge anger, you force your body to store it, and the storage system is not designed for long-term holding. Consider a person who suppresses anger in friendships. A friend repeatedly cancels plans last minute. Instead of expressing frustration, they brush it off with, "It's fine," but inside, they feel devalued. Over time, the anger turns into quiet withdrawal. They stop inviting the friend, stop responding with warmth, and allow the friendship to fade. The friend may never know why the relationship cooled. The suppressed anger ended the connection, even though it was never named. Sarcasm is one of the clearest signs of suppressed anger leaking out. People who cannot express anger directly often use cutting humor as a release. The words may be framed as jokes, but the sting is real. Others feel hurt or confused, unsure whether the sarcasm reflects truth. Over time, sarcasm erodes trust because it masks hostility behind humor. The anger is present, but its indirect expression damages relationships more than direct honesty might have. Self-harm is another way suppressed anger turns inward. When you cannot express it outwardly, you may unconsciously punish yourself. This can show up in negative self-talk, destructive habits, or even physical harm. Instead of saying, "I am angry at how I was treated," you say, "I am the problem." The anger that should have been directed toward injustice or mistreatment becomes an attack on your own worth. The suppression twists the emotion into self-destruction. Workplaces often reward suppression by equating it with professionalism. Employees are told to remain calm, avoid emotion, and keep everything polite. While regulation of anger is important, suppression is not the same as regulation. Regulation means noticing the anger, understanding it, and expressing it appropriately. Suppression means pretending it is not there. Over time, suppressed anger in organizations leads to toxic environments where resentment simmers beneath the surface. Conflicts remain unresolved, and the atmosphere becomes heavy with unspoken hostility. Even small daily interactions reveal the cost of suppression. Someone might feel irritated when a stranger cuts in line but stays silent. They think they avoided conflict, but the irritation lingers, making them short-tempered with the next person they meet. Another might feel unappreciated when their partner forgets something important, but say nothing. Hours later, they make a snide remark about something unrelated. The anger leaks out sideways, confusing others because it is disconnected from the original event. The fear of expressing anger often comes from misunderstanding the emotion itself. Anger is not inherently destructive. It signals that a boundary has been crossed, that something feels unjust, or that a need is unmet. When expressed clearly and respectfully, anger can create change and strengthen relationships. Suppression denies the message and removes the chance for resolution. The energy of the emotion remains but has nowhere to go, so it leaks out in damaging ways. Consider a partner who finally chooses to express anger constructively. Instead of lashing out or staying silent, they say, "When you dismiss my opinion, I feel hurt and disrespected. I need you to listen more fully." This expression may feel risky, but it creates clarity. The partner knows the issue and has a chance to respond. Contrast this with suppression, where silence breeds resentment and sarcasm. The first approach may spark conflict, but it also sparks resolution. The second guarantees a slow breakdown. Suppressed anger also shapes identity. Over time, you may begin to see yourself as someone who never gets angry. This self-image may feel positive, but it denies part of your humanity. Anger is a natural emotion. Pretending it does not exist disconnects you from your own truth. The identity of calmness becomes a mask that hides unprocessed feelings. Beneath the surface, the anger continues to influence behavior, often in ways you do not recognize. The danger of suppressing anger is not just that it damages relationships and health, but that it erodes authenticity. When you deny anger, you deny part of yourself. You lose the chance to express boundaries, to demand respect, and to stand for your needs. Suppression feels like control, but it is really avoidance, and avoidance never resolves anything. Bottled rage leaks out, whether through resentment, sarcasm, or self-harm, and its effects ripple outward until the cost is undeniable. Seeking control over everything is a habit that often comes from fear. When life feels uncertain, the mind tries to manage every detail, believing that control will create safety. At first, this seems reasonable. Planning and preparation are useful, but when the need for control extends to things that cannot be managed, other people's choices, unexpected events, or the future itself, it becomes a source of anxiety and exhaustion. The more you try to hold on, the more life resists, and the harder you grip, the more drained you become. Imagine someone hosting a family gathering. They plan every detail down to the seating chart, the menu, and the timing of each activity. When a guest arrives late, or a dish does not turn out as expected, they feel overwhelmed. Instead of enjoying the event, they spend the evening tense and irritable, snapping at others. Their attempt to control everything ruins their own experience. The need for control replaced connection with stress, and the gathering became a test of order rather than a moment of joy. In workplaces, this pattern shows up in micromanagement. A manager who fears mistakes hovers over employees, checking every detail, rewriting work, and giving constant directions. The team feels suffocated, creativity shrinks and morale drops. The manager, instead of feeling relief, grows more anxious because they cannot monitor everything at once. The effort to control becomes counterproductive, leading to burnout for the manager and disengagement for the team. By trying to manage the uncontrollable, they create the very problems they fear. Relationships suffer under this habit as well. Consider a partner who tries to control every aspect of the other's life: what they wear, who they see, or how they spend time. They justify it as care, but it is rooted in fear of loss. The controlled partner grows resentful, pulling away in search of independence. The more control is applied, the more distance is created. The person seeking control feels even less secure, so they tighten their grip further. The cycle continues until the relationship breaks. The need for control destroys the very bond it was meant to protect. Parenting provides a clear example. A parent who fears failure for their child may try to control every decision: school subjects, friendships, hobbies, and future plans. At first, the child complies, but as they grow, the pressure breeds rebellion or dependence. Either they push back fiercely, straining the relationship, or they struggle to make decisions on their own because they never learned independence. The parent, believing control was love, instead stifled growth. The roots of this habit often lie in early experiences. Children who grew up in unstable or unpredictable environments may learn that control is survival. If chaos surrounded them, they found safety in trying to manage as much as possible. As adults, this pattern carries forward, even when the environment no longer demands it. The mind equates control with security, even though the circumstances have changed. The cost is constant anxiety. Life is unpredictable by nature. Trying to control every variable is like trying to stop waves from reaching the shore. Each attempt fails, and each failure reinforces fear. The person who seeks control feels restless when plans change, when others act differently than expected, or when uncertainty arises. Instead of adapting, they double down, exhausting themselves with constant monitoring and planning. The very effort to create safety generates stress. Consider travel as an example. Someone who needs control may overplan every aspect of a trip: schedules, routes, meals, and contingencies. When a flight is delayed or weather shifts plans, they panic. The disruption feels unbearable because it highlights what they cannot control. Another traveler, who accepts uncertainty, adjusts and finds a new path. The difference is not in circumstance, but in mindset. The person seeking control experiences exhaustion from fighting what cannot be managed, while the flexible one maintains calm. Workload also reveals this struggle. A professional who tries to control every project detail often works long hours, unable to delegate. They fear others will not meet their standard, so they carry everything themselves. The result is exhaustion and mistakes that come from overload. Delegation would have spread the weight, but the need for control made it impossible. What began as a desire for excellence turned into a recipe for burnout. Even in small daily moments, The habit shows someone may insist on cleaning the house in a specific way, correcting others who try to help. They may argue over the exact route to take when driving. They may obsess over how conversations unfold, replaying words to imagine how they could have controlled them better. These moments seem minor, but they reveal the underlying fear: if things are not managed perfectly, something will go wrong. The constant vigilance leaves little room for peace. The danger of seeking control is that it blocks connection with others. When you try to manage everything, you leave no space for spontaneity, collaboration, or trust. Others may pull away because they feel dismissed or suffocated. Relationships weaken because mutual respect is replaced by one person's need to dominate. What might have been shared experiences become controlled performances, with one person scripting the outcome. Health is also affected. Chronic stress from trying to manage the uncontrollable leads to tension, sleep problems, and weakened immunity. The body is not designed to stay in a constant state of vigilance. Over time, the strain leads to physical and mental breakdown. What began as an attempt to create safety ends up harming the very system it was meant to protect. The irony is that people who seek control often miss the areas where they do have influence. They spend energy trying to manage others' actions or unpredictable events, while neglecting their own responses, choices, and boundaries. Real power lies in what you can control: your attitude, your effort, your reactions. But when the focus shifts outward to the uncontrollable, energy is wasted and peace is lost. Consider someone who faces a sudden job loss. A person seeking control might spiral, obsessing over why it happened, blaming themselves, or resenting others. They burn energy fighting the reality they cannot change. Another person who accepts what is uncontrollable shifts focus to updating their resume, seeking support, and planning next steps. Both face the same event, but the difference lies in where they place their energy. One clings to what cannot be changed, the other invests in what can. Seeking control over everything is exhausting, because it sets you against life itself. The world will not bend to every plan, people will not act as expected, and uncertainty will always exist. By trying to control what cannot be managed, you guarantee anxiety and depletion. The more you grip, the more life resists, and the tighter you hold, the more it slips away. The effort to control creates the very instability you are trying to avoid, leaving you drained, anxious, and disconnected from the peace that comes only with acceptance.